Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The rhythmic splash of water and excited chatter of children filled the air as Kyle Joyce watched his daughter Emma execute a perfect butterfly stroke across the pool. His trained eye caught the slight adjustment needed in her shoulder rotation, but pride swelled in his chest at her determination. At 11, she was already showing the dedication that would take her far in competitive swimming. His phone buzzed with a message from his wife. "Sorry, can't make it to practice again. Emergency meeting with Saul about the Richardson development." "Don't wait up." Kyle's jaw tightened imperceptibly as he deleted the message. Third missed practice this week. He glanced at Emma, grateful she was too focused on her training to check if her mother had arrived. "Beautiful form, Emma," Coach Sally Daniel called out. "Just remember to keep those shoulders loose on the rotation." Later that evening, at his pediatric physical therapy clinic, Kyle worked with 6-year-old Marcus, who was making remarkable progress after a severe car accident. "That's it, buddy," Kyle encouraged, supporting the boy's weight as he took tentative steps. "You're doing great." Faith Bruce, his clinic manager, appeared in the doorway. "Kyle, got a minute?" Corporate sent another email about the buyout offer. "After I finish with Marcus," Kyle replied, maintaining his focus on the child's progress. Marcus's mother watched anxiously from her chair, and Kyle gave her a reassuring smile. 20 minutes later, in his office, Faith handed him the printed email. "They're getting aggressive, threatening to open a competing clinic 2 blocks away if you don't sell." Kyle scanned the document, his expression hardening. They'd turn this into an assembly line. 15-minute sessions, standardized treatment plans, insurance-dictated care. Everything I've fought against. "We both know what happens to kids like Marcus under corporate care," Faith agreed, leaning against his desk. "But they're offering serious money, Kyle." "Money isn't everything." He set the paper aside. "How's the Williams case progressing?" Faith started to respond when Kyle's phone lit up with a text from Emma. "Dad, I qualified for states." "Where's Mom?" Kyle's stomach clenched. Marilyn had promised to be there for this meet. He'd reminded her 3 times this morning. "Everything okay?" Faith asked, noting his expression. Marilyn missed Emma's qualifying meet. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. "Another emergency with Saul Wiley." Faith's face remained carefully neutral. "The new boss who's been keeping her late every night?" "The same." Kyle pulled up his calendar. "She's missed 8 of Emma's events since he took over 2 months ago." "People talk, you know," Faith said carefully. "At the real estate office." Kyle looked up sharply. "What kind of talk?" "Just observations. Late meetings, closed doors. The way he looks at her in public." Faith hesitated. "And the way she lets him." The first concrete piece of evidence came on a Tuesday afternoon. Faith was leaving a client lunch when she spotted Marilyn's distinctive red Tesla parked at the Westbrook Hotel at 2 p.m. during what was supposed to be a board meeting at her office. Faith's hand shook slightly as she snapped a photo. She'd known Kyle since college, watched him build his practice from nothing, seen his dedication to every child who came through his doors. He didn't deserve this. Later that week, Emma burst into Kyle's office after school, her backpack still on. "Dad, you'll never guess who I saw today." Kyle looked up from his paperwork. "Who's that?" "Sweetheart, Mom and Uncle Saul. They were having lunch at Castellano's when I walked by with Jenny after early dismissal." Emma dropped into a chair. "Mom looked really surprised to see me. Like, really surprised. She said they were having a work lunch, but..." She frowned. "She didn't know we had early dismissal today?" Kyle kept his expression neutral. "Did she say anything else?" "No, she just kept saying it was a work thing." "But Dad..." Emma lowered her voice. Uncle Saul had his hand on her arm. Like, not in a work way. That night, after Emma was asleep, Kyle sat in his home office reviewing credit card statements. The charges jumped out at him. La Pearl Boutique, $430. The Westbrook Hotel, $289. The Grand Marina Hotel, $315. All on days he'd been working late at the clinic. His phone buzzed with a text from Faith. "Check your email. Security footage from last week." I'm sorry. The video was grainy but clear enough. Marilyn entering Saul's office at 9:47 p.m., leaving at 1:23 a.m., her hair disheveled, his tie loose. Kyle's hands didn't shake as he downloaded and saved the file. His voice was steady when he called his lawyer the next morning to schedule a consultation. The final confirmation came through Emma, ironically. She'd borrowed Marilyn's iPad for a school project when the messages started popping up. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. S. Missing your touch already. These meetings are torture when I can't have you. S. Soon, baby. Kyle's working late again Thursday. The usual place? M. Emma, confused and disturbed, brought the iPad to her father. Kyle took screenshots, his heart breaking for his daughter even as his resolve hardened. The initial confrontation happened on a Sunday evening. Emma was at a sleepover, and Kyle had spent the day gathering his evidence and consulting with his lawyer. We need to talk about Saul, Kyle said as Marilyn scrolled through her phone on the couch. She didn't look up. What about him? About your affair with him. Now she looked up, her face a mask of practiced innocence that quickly shifted to defensive anger. It was one mistake, Kyle. One drunken mistake that meant nothing. Really? Kyle's voice was ice. One mistake that's been happening for months. In multiple hotels? Color drained from Marilyn's face. You've been spying on me? No, you've been careless. And Emma saw you. She's just a child. She doesn't understand. She understands enough. Kyle pulled out his phone. Want to explain these messages? Or the hotel charges? Or maybe the security footage? Marilyn's mask cracked. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're so perfect with your little charity clinic and your holier-than-thou attitude about patient care. At least Saul understands ambition. Ambition? Kyle's laugh was cold. Is that what you call sleeping your way up the corporate ladder? You're just jealous because I make real money while you play savior to crippled kids. The words hung in the air like poison. Get out, Kyle said quietly. Now. This is my house too. The house I bought before we married? With my inheritance? That house. Kyle's smile was razor sharp. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag. Then I'm changing the locks. That's when Alberta Merritt, Marilyn's mother, launched her attack. She'd arrived unannounced, clearly summoned by a crying phone call from Marilyn. How dare you throw my daughter out? Alberta shrieked, bursting into the house. After all she's sacrificed for you, working those long hours to support your little vanity project of a clinic. Kyle stood his ground. Your daughter is having an affair with her boss. She's neglected Emma for months, and now she's trying to paint herself as the victim, because she is. Alberta advanced on him. If you'd been a proper husband, given her the attention she deserved, the attention she deserves? Kyle's voice rose slightly. Like the attention she gives Emma? When was the last time she attended a swim meet? A parent-teacher conference? Hell, when was the last time she made dinner for her daughter? Don't you dare question her mothering. Alberta spat. Emma would choose her over you any day. Marilyn, who had been watching the exchange with calculated tears, suddenly smiled. It was an ugly expression that revealed her true nature. She's right, Marilyn said coldly. I'm her mother. I have money, influence, connections. What do you have? A failing clinic and a hero complex? No judge will side with you. We'll see about that, Kyle replied calmly. Now get out of my house before I call the police. The final betrayal came from Drew O'Connor, Kyle's friend of 15 years. They met for coffee at Drew's insistence. I need to tell you something, Drew said, staring into his cup. I've known about Marilyn and Saul for months. Kyle's face remained impassive. And you didn't think to tell me? I was trying to protect you, man. You've got so much on your plate with the clinic and Emma. Protect me? Kyle's voice was deadly quiet. By watching my wife make a fool of me? By letting my daughter get hurt? It's not that simple. Actually, it is. Kyle stood up. You chose sides, Drew. You chose wrong. As he walked out of the coffee shop, his phone buzzed with messages from mutual friends. They'd heard Marilyn's version. Kyle was controlling, emotionally unavailable, married to his work. They believed her. Kyle blocked their numbers one by one, his resolve strengthening with each deletion. He had all the evidence he needed. Now it was time to plan his next move. Emma was waiting when he got home, curled up on the couch with her swim team hoodie. "Dad?" Her voice was small. "Is Mom coming back?" Kyle sat beside her, pulling her close. "Not right now, sweetheart. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to get through this together." "I know, Dad." Emma hugged him tight. "I saw the messages on her iPad. I'm not stupid. She chose him over us, didn't she?" Kyle's heart broke and reformed, stronger and more determined. "Some people make bad choices, Em. But that's on them, not us. Want to help me make dinner?" As they moved to the kitchen, Kyle's phone lit up with a text from Faith. "Just heard what happened. Need anything?" He looked at Emma, already pulling ingredients from the fridge, and typed back, "Just your friendship." For now, the pieces were in place. Marilyn had shown her true colors. Now it was time to make her face the consequences of her choices. But first, he had a daughter to take care of and a clinic to protect. Kyle Joyce might be just a physical therapist in Marilyn's eyes, but he was about to show her exactly what kind of man she'd underestimated. The morning after throwing Marilyn out, Kyle sat in his office reviewing financial statements when Faith knocked on his door. "You need to see this," she said, placing a business card on his desk. "Dr. Rachel Lake, Saul Wiley's wife." Kyle studied the card. "Pediatrician at Eastbrook Children's Hospital. She called the clinic asking to meet you. Says it's personal, not professional." Faith lowered her voice. "She knows, Kyle." The meeting was arranged at a small coffee shop across town. Rachel Lake proved to be a sharp-featured woman with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She got straight to the point. "How long have you known?" she asked, stirring her untouched coffee. "About 2 months. You?" "Suspected for 6. Rachel's smile was bitter. "Saul's not as clever as he thinks. This is his pattern: young executives, usually married. Makes them feel special, powerful, until he discards them." Kyle leaned forward. "Tell me more." 2 previous affairs with employees. Both ended in NDAs and generous severance packages. Rachel pulled out a manila envelope. "The companies buried it to avoid scandal. But I kept copies." "Why show me this?" "Because this time he picked the wrong target." Rachel's eyes hardened. "Your wife may be willing to destroy her family for him, but I'm done protecting his reputation." Their alliance formed over the next hour. Rachel had resources, connections, and 20 years of documented evidence. Kyle had Faith's security footage and Emma's iPad messages. "There's someone else you should meet," Kyle said, making a call. "Heidi Carey, my lawyer." Heidi arrived 20 minutes later, a force of nature in a tailored suit. "Dr. Lake, your husband handled my daughter's physical therapy 5 years ago," she explained, sitting down. "Best care she ever received. That's why I'm handling both your cases pro bono." "Both cases?" Rachel asked. "Divorce and corporate malfeasance." Heidi's smile was predatory. "Kyle's evidence plus your documentation? We're going to destroy them." Back at the clinic, Faith compiled everything. Security footage, emails, witness statements from office staff who'd seen Marilyn and Saul's meetings. Sally Daniel called, Faith mentioned, organizing files. Emma's swim coach? She's documented every meet Marilyn's missed, every practice she skipped. Says she'll testify if needed. Kyle nodded, reviewing the growing evidence. "They thought I'd just roll over and take it. That I'd be too afraid of losing Emma to fight back. They don't know you very well, do they?" Faith's hand brushed his shoulder briefly. "No," Kyle agreed. "They really don't." The security system installation took half a day. Every entrance covered, the technician confirmed. Audio and video recording, motion sensors, remote monitoring. Everything uploads automatically to secure cloud storage. Kyle handed him a check. "Perfect." Dr. Eileen Castro's child psychology practice came highly recommended. She met with Emma while Kyle waited outside. "She's angry," Dr. Castro reported afterward. "Not at you. At her mother's betrayal. She feels abandoned, replaced. These sessions will help document the emotional impact." "How's she really doing?" Kyle asked, paternal concern breaking through his calculated demeanor. "She's resilient. Having your stable presence helps enormously." Dr. Castro's expression turned professional. I'm documenting everything for the custody hearing. Marilyn's behavior patterns, Emma's emotional state, your consistent involvement. The court will have a clear picture. That afternoon, Kyle met with his financial advisor. Half the joint assets were transferred to protected accounts, completely legal, given the circumstances. The advisor had worked with enough divorce cases to know the drill. She'll try to drain the accounts when she realizes what's happening, he warned. Let her try, Kyle replied. Everything's documented. Rachel's investigation into Saul's business practices yielded gold. Look at these property deals, she said during their next meeting. Ethical violations everywhere. Insider trading, kickbacks, manipulated valuations. He's been using his affairs to keep people quiet. And Marilyn? Complicit. Rachel's disgust was evident. She's been helping him hide the paperwork. That's why he targeted her. He needed someone in real estate who'd play along. Kyle maintained meticulous records of his parenting duties. Every school pickup, every meal prepared, every homework session helped. Emma's activities filled his calendar. Swim practice, doctor appointments, tutoring. Marilyn's attempts at gaslighting grew more frequent. She'd change plans last minute, then deny they'd ever been made. Each incident was recorded, documented, timed. I told you I'd take Emma this weekend, she'd insist. No, you said next weekend, Kyle would reply calmly, recording everything. You're trying to turn her against me. You're doing that yourself, Marilyn. Alberta proved to be a problem. She showed up unannounced one afternoon while Emma was doing homework. I'm taking my granddaughter shopping, she announced, barging in. No, you're not, Kyle said firmly. You don't have permission to take her anywhere. I don't need permission. I'm her grandmother. You need my permission. Kyle's voice was steel. And after your little performance at dinner, you're not getting it. How dare you? The security system is recording, Alberta. Every word, every action. Keep that in mind. She left in a fury, but the incident was preserved. Another piece of evidence for the custody hearing. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock. Marilyn's 37th birthday celebration at Le Maison, the city's most exclusive hotel. Quite a guest list, Rachel remarked, reviewing the names. Board members, social climbers, everyone who's been enabling their affair. She's gathering her witnesses. Sources say she's planning some kind of announcement, Heidi added, painting herself as the victim of a loveless marriage, forced to find happiness elsewhere. Kyle's laugh was cold. Is that her play? Not just hers. Rachel's expression was grim. Saul's planning to announce our divorce. He'll blame my emotional instability, classic gaslighting. Make it seem like I drove him to cheat. Perfect timing, Heidi said. Everything's ready. HR department, real estate board, family court. All the evidence packages are prepared. Emma's spending that weekend with your parents? Rachel confirmed. Kyle nodded. They'll keep her safe while we finish this. The final pieces fell into place. Process servers were arranged, disguised as hotel staff. Key witnesses were positioned. Everything was documented, time-stamped, legally bulletproof. You realize there's no going back from this, Faith said quietly as they reviewed the final preparations. Kyle thought of Emma's face when she saw those messages. Thought of Marilyn's cruel words, her threats about custody. Thought of every missed meet, every broken promise, every lie. Good, he replied. That's exactly what I want. Rachel squeezed his shoulder. They thought we'd be easy targets. The devoted father too afraid of losing his daughter to fight. The doctor's wife too concerned with appearances to make a scene. Their mistake, Kyle said simply. The trap was set. Everything was in place. Now they just had to wait for Marilyn's birthday party and watch their carefully orchestrated plan unfold. As Kyle tucked Emma in that night before she left for his parents' house, she hugged him tight. You're not letting Mom take me away, are you, Dad? Never, he promised. Some battles are worth fighting. You're worth every single one. He closed her door and checked his phone. Messages from Heidi, Rachel, and Faith confirmed everything was ready. In 2 days, Marilyn and Saul would learn exactly what happened when they underestimated the wrong people. Kyle smiled, thinking of Emma's words from months ago. I'm not stupid. She chose him over us. Well, now they'd all face the consequences of that choice. The party invitations sat on his desk, mocking in their elegance. Soon, that expensive cardstock would be the least of Marilyn's concerns. Kyle had built his career helping children overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Now he'd use that same patience, that same strategic thinking, to protect his daughter and destroy those who tried to hurt her. Let them think he was weak. Let them believe their lies. The trap was set, and this time, there would be no escape. Lou Maison's grand ballroom sparkled with expensive decorations and even more expensive guests. Marilyn held court near the champagne fountain, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Saul Wiley stood nearby, his proprietary smile barely disguising his smugness. "And here's to my beautiful daughter," Alberta Merritt's voice carried across the room as she raised her glass. "Who showed such strength in the face of neglect and isolation." From their observation point in the hotel lobby, Kyle and Rachel watched the security feed on Faith's tablet. "Your mother-in-law has quite the imagination," Rachel remarked dryly. "Oh, she's just warming up," Kyle replied, checking his watch. "Ready?" Rachel smoothed her elegant black dress. "Born ready." Inside, Alberta continued her performance. "A mother's love is sacred. When Marilyn came to me, devastated by years of emotional abandonment," the ballroom doors opened. Heads turned as Kyle and Rachel made their calculated entrance. Marilyn's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "Now," Kyle spoke quietly into his earpiece. The servers, carefully selected process servers in disguise, moved with practiced precision. 3 approached Marilyn simultaneously, another 2 converged on Saul. Papers were served with quiet professionalism. "What is this?" Marilyn's voice rose shrilly as she stared at the documents. "You dare crash my party, Mrs. Joyce," one server interrupted politely. "You've been served with divorce papers, a custody suit, and a corporate ethics violation notice." Saul's face purpled as he received his own stack. "This is ridiculous. I'll have your jobs for." "Mr. Wiley," another server continued calmly, "you've been served with divorce papers, a corporate ethics investigation notice, and documentation of workplace harassment violations." Kyle's team moved efficiently through the crowd. The HR representative received detailed documentation of the affair and its impact on workplace dynamics. Board members were handed evidence of ethical violations. The family court mediator received comprehensive documentation of Marilyn's parental neglect. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, recording everything. Marilyn's carefully maintained mask cracked completely. "You bastard!" she shrieked at Kyle. "You planned this?" Swim meets and broken promises. About hotel rooms and secret messages. About using corporate resources to hide affairs. The crowd murmured, papers rustling as people read the evidence. "You're lying." Marilyn's voice cracked. "He's lying. I'm a good mother." "The records say otherwise," Kyle replied. "Every missed event, every broken promise, every time you chose your affair over our daughter. It's all documented." The ballroom had become very quiet except for the sound of papers being reviewed and phones recording. "Get out," Marilyn screamed. "Get out of my party." "Your party?" Kyle smiled coldly. "I think it just became a business meeting. You might want to start explaining those property deals to your board members." The real estate board's ethics investigation moved with unusual speed, perhaps motivated by the viral videos of Saul's threatening behavior at the party. Previous NDAs have surfaced, Heidi reported during their strategy meeting. 2 former employees came forward after seeing the party footage. "Turns out money can't quite buy silence forever, especially when they smell blood in the water," Rachel added with satisfaction. The custody hearing was equally decisive. Alberta's recorded threats from the security system played clearly for the judge. "I'll take that child whether you like it or not," her voice rang through the courtroom. "You have no right to keep her from us." Kyle's documented involvement in Emma's life created a stark contrast. Every swim meet attended, every doctor's appointment managed, every school event supported, while Marilyn's absences mounted. Dr. Castro's professional testimony proved devastating. Emma exhibits clear signs of emotional abandonment from her mother, compounded by the discovery of the affair. Mrs. Joyce's pattern of choosing her relationship with Mr. Wiley over her daughter's needs has caused significant trauma. Drew's attempt to defend Marilyn backfired spectacularly when Kyle's lawyer cross-examined him. So you knew about the affair for months? I was trying to protect. Yes or no, Mr. O'Connor? Did you knowingly help conceal this situation?
Yes.
While watching Emma suffer, Drew's silence spoke volumes. The corporate investigation revealed deeper corruption than anyone expected. Marilyn's financial misconduct with company resources became impossible to ignore. She used corporate accounts to book hotel rooms, the forensic accountant testified. Falsified expense reports to hide gifts. Used company cars for personal meetings. Kyle's clinic received an unexpected surge of support when the story broke. Former patients' families rallied around him, sharing stories of his dedication and care. He spent extra hours with my son, one mother told the local news. Never rushed us, never compromised care for profit. And they wanted to force him out? Shame on them. The corporate healthcare provider quietly withdrew their buyout attempt. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. Primary custody is awarded to Kyle Joyce. Mrs. Joyce will have supervised visitation only, pending completion of parenting classes and counseling. Emma's response was to hug her father tightly. Can we get ice cream? Kyle laughed, his first genuine laugh in months. Absolutely. The state swimming championship became Emma's moment of triumph. Kyle and Faith cheered from the stands as she touched the wall first, setting a new personal record. That's my girl, Kyle said proudly. Faith's hand found his. She's amazing. Like her father. Saul's firing made headlines, especially after the harassment suits went public. Marilyn lost her executive position the same day, forced to accept a lower-level position at a smaller firm in another city. Alberta's attempts to contact Emma were firmly blocked. The restraining order is quite clear. Kyle told the security guard at Emma's school. No unsupervised contact. The partnership between Kyle's clinic and Rachel's pediatric practice created an innovative new therapy program. We're helping twice as many kids now, Rachel noted during their opening celebration. Some good came from all this. Emma's 12th birthday party filled Kyle's backyard with real friends, people who had stood by them through everything. Sally Daniel brought the swim team. Faith organized games. Rachel's children mixed easily with Emma's school friends. A package arrived that morning, Marilyn's attempt at manipulation. An expensive gift with a tearful card about healing our family. What should we do with it? Emma asked. Kyle smiled. I was thinking the children's hospital could use it more. Emma hugged him. Good call, Dad. Later, as Kyle cleaned up after the party, Faith helped gather decorations. Emma mentioned wanting to visit the coast this summer, she said casually. She loves the beach. Kyle looked at her thoughtfully. Would you like to join us? Faith's smile was answer enough. The party aftermath sparkled with possibility, not just of new beginnings, but of victories well-earned and battles correctly fought. Kyle had protected what mattered most, destroyed those who threatened it, and emerged stronger. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't just success. It was success built on unwavering principle and patient strength. As he watched Faith and Emma laughing together over the last piece of birthday cake, Kyle knew he'd chosen exactly the right path. Dad, Emma called. Faith's never been surfing. Can we teach her this summer? Kyle met Faith's eyes across the room. I think that's an excellent idea. The future stretched bright before them, free from manipulation and lies. They'd earned every bit of it. Epilogue. 5 years later. A warm spring breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through Kyle's expanded clinic courtyard. The therapeutic garden, a joint project with Rachel's pediatric practice, buzzed with activity as children worked on their motor skills through gardening. Faith watched from their shared office as Kyle guided a young patient through balance exercises. After 5 years of marriage, she still admired his unwavering dedication to his patients. Their wedding had been small but joyful, with 16-year-old Emma as maid of honor and Rachel's children in the wedding party. Dad's doing the thing again, Emma commented, joining Faith at the window. Fresh from swim practice, she'd grown into a striking young woman, recently accepted to Stanford on a swimming scholarship. The thing? Faith smiled, knowing exactly what Emma meant. Where he spends extra time with the kids who remind him of me at that age. Emma's own smile was understanding. He never could resist helping the determined ones. The clinic had become a model for ethical pediatric care, featured in medical journals and studied by healthcare providers nationwide. The corporate buyout attempt felt like ancient history, especially after their innovative therapy program garnered national attention. Rachel entered, carrying fresh coffee. At 47, she'd found her own happiness, recently engaged to a fellow pediatrician who understood her dedication to her patients. "Quarterly numbers are in," she announced. "Our joint practice is outperforming every corporate healthcare center in the state. Success through integrity," Faith quoted their unofficial motto. "How's the new therapy wing coming along?" "On schedule. The sensory garden should be ready for summer sessions." Rachel paused, checking her phone. "Oh, you'll love this. Guess who's trying to rebuild her reputation again?" Faith raised an eyebrow. "Marilyn?" Posted another heartfelt apology on social media. Claims she's grown and learned from her mistakes. Rachel's tone dripped sarcasm. "The comments are not kind." 5 years hadn't been gentle to Marilyn Joyce, formerly Wiley. After losing her executive position, she'd bounced between smaller firms, her reputation following her like a shadow. Her supervised visitation with Emma had ended when Emma turned 14 and firmly refused further contact. "She sent another birthday card last week," Emma mentioned casually. "Dad and I donated it to the Children's Hospital, like always." Saul Wiley's fall had been even more spectacular. The harassment suits had multiplied once victims realized they weren't alone. His legal fees had drained his savings, and his attempts to rebuild his career were consistently thwarted by his own documented behavior. He tried applying for a position at Western Real Estate, Rachel shared. They Googled his name and ended the interview in 5 minutes. The last they'd heard, Saul and Marilyn had tried reconnecting, a desperate attempt to reclaim their former glory. It had ended predictably, with Saul being caught with another younger executive and Marilyn facing fresh humiliation. Alberta Merritt had never accepted her reduced circumstances. Her attempts to contact Emma through social media had earned her a restraining order extension. Now she spent her time writing bitter blog posts about parental alienation that nobody read. "Remember Drew?" Emma asked suddenly. "He came into the coffee shop yesterday, tried to make small talk about old times. How's he doing?" Faith asked, though she knew the story. "Working entry-level sales at some startup. Turns out being known as the guy who helped cover up workplace harassment isn't great for your career." Emma shrugged. "He asked about Mom. Actually, I told him I already had all the parents I needed." Faith hugged her stepdaughter, heart swelling. Their relationship had grown naturally, built on respect and genuine care rather than forced connections. The therapy garden continued flourishing, much like their blended family. Kyle's patient philosophy had transformed into a comprehensive treatment approach that prioritized long-term care over quick profits. The waiting list for their clinic grew longer each month. "Hey," Kyle entered the office, finished with his patient. "What's everyone doing in here?" "Watching you work your magic," Faith replied, accepting his quick kiss. "And sharing news. Stanford sent Emma's housing information." "Already?" Kyle looked at his daughter proudly. "Seems like yesterday you were that determined 11-year-old who wouldn't give up on her butterfly stroke." "Well, someone taught me about persistence," Emma smiled. "And integrity. And choosing the right battles." Rachel checked her watch. "Speaking of battles, we should head to the board meeting. They're voting on implementing our therapy program across the hospital network." As they gathered their materials, Kyle paused to look around his office. Photos tracked their family's growth. Emma's state championships, his wedding to Faith, family vacations, Rachel's engagement party, clinic expansions, graduation ceremonies. Each image represented a victory built on principle rather than compromise. "Coming to dinner tonight?" he asked Rachel. "The kids want to hear more stories about their favorite aunt's medical school adventures." "Wouldn't miss it," Rachel replied. "Someone needs to balance out all these swimming stories." They walked together through the therapy garden, passing children who were healing and growing stronger every day. The scent of roses followed them, a reminder of how beauty could flourish in unexpected places. Later that evening, their home filled with laughter as their extended family gathered for their traditional weekly dinner. Kyle watched Emma demonstrating proper swimming technique to Rachel's youngest, while Faith and Rachel debated the merits of different therapy approaches. His phone buzzed, another desperate message from Marilyn, sent through a mutual acquaintance. Something about regret and second chances. Kyle deleted it without reading further. Some chapters were better left closed. Dad, Emma called. Tell them about the time you and Faith got lost trying to find that surfing spot. Kyle joined his family, leaving thoughts of the past behind. They built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, a testament to the power of choosing right over easy, integrity over compromise. Success, they learned, wasn't just about winning. It was about winning on your own terms, staying true to your principles even when the easy path beckoned. Their happiness wasn't revenge. It was justice, earned through unwavering strength and patient determination. The roses in their garden bloomed stronger each year, their roots deep and stable, just like their family, built on trust, nourished by love, and strengthened by the storms they'd weathered together. Faith caught his eye across the room, her smile saying everything words couldn't. They'd chosen their paths, fought their battles, and emerged stronger. Together. And that, Kyle reflected as he looked at his thriving family, was the greatest victory of all.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
From an early age, I found solace in long, open roads. As a teenager, I worked in my uncle's repair shop, learning the intricacies of engines and the satisfaction of fixing something broken. After high school, I earned my commercial driver's license, drawn to the independence trucking offered. For years, I crisscrossed the country, making connections with small-town folks and big-city strangers alike. One summer, while delivering hay bales to a remote farm in Nebraska, I encountered a family struggling with a failing well. Without hesitation, I offered my help, spending hours rigging a temporary solution until professional repairs could be made. That experience stuck with me, reminding me how small gestures could profoundly affect others. My marriage to Marcy was a whirlwind. We met at a diner during a layover, and her quick wit and charming laugh captivated me. Within 6 months, we exchanged vows, with dreams of a shared life built on trust and mutual goals. Yet, as time passed, cracks began to form, subtle but undeniable. On one particularly grueling route, I rescued a fellow trucker whose rig had flipped during a storm. While waiting for help, we shared stories over soggy sandwiches, and he confided in me about his failing marriage. His words echoed in my mind for weeks, making me question whether my own relationship with Marcy was as solid as I'd believed. My daughters, Linda and Lauren, became my anchor. Even when work kept me on the road for days or weeks, their nightly calls reminded me of my purpose. I dreamed of building a life where I could be more present, but the financial demands of our growing family kept me behind the wheel. One fortuitous trip through Texas changed everything. While delivering medical supplies, I stumbled upon a small farming community desperate to save their land from foreclosure. My involvement started with a single phone call and blossomed into a partnership that led to the founding of a village. That decision set the stage for both triumphs and heartbreaks that would define the next chapter of my life. Half a decade ago, an unplanned turn of events led me to create what is now a thriving settlement named Circumstances. Today, it's a home for 349 individuals, a community that emerged from an unexpected opportunity. It all began rather abruptly. After completing a delivery of specialty bandages in Texas, I was assigned a new route that promised an early return home. With my credentials for handling sensitive materials, I was among the few eligible for the task. The pickup was conveniently close, and the drop-off point was just an hour from home. Taking an alternate route cut my travel time significantly, leaving me hours ahead of schedule and opening a door I never anticipated. On my way back, I stopped at an intersection and noticed a hand-painted sign advertising land for sale, property that was about to be seized for unpaid taxes. Following the signs led me to a farmhouse where an elderly couple was struggling to keep up with rising property taxes. They were selling a portion of their land to hold onto their farm. After calling my dad, we decided to purchase the farm through our family trust at fair market value. This arrangement allowed the couple to stay in their home as long-term renters at an affordable rate. They were deeply appreciative and offered to help us in any way they could. We sectioned off 10 acres at the crossroads to build a gas station and convenience store, a smart investment since the nearest town was an hour away. I also suggested my dad acquire additional parcels of land surrounding the intersection. He successfully purchased 10 acres at each corner. While surveying the property, we discovered an underground river capable of supplying water to tens of thousands of people, making it ideal for future commercial development. By the time I finished my delivery and took another rush job, I still made it home on time. 6 months later, after a grueling 16-day haul, which included a breakdown, I finally completed my delivery early on a Wednesday morning, 12 hours ahead of schedule, and parked at the company yard. I picked up the keys to my freshly restored Ford truck, which had just undergone a complete overhaul during my time off. I had restored its body and frame, paid a local shop to repaint it, and had a new engine installed by Jameson's Auto. Once a weathered red, the truck now gleamed in midnight black with chrome accents and a freshly painted tailgate featuring the iconic Ford logo. It looked showroom new, even qualifying for collector plates. That evening, I arrived home in time for dinner, ready to savor a quiet night with my wife, Marcy, and our 2 daughters. After 16 days on the road, I was thrilled to be back early, eager to surprise Marcy before her workday began at 9 a.m. But as I approached our street at 8 a.m., my excitement turned to confusion. Parked in our driveway was a truck that didn't belong there. Jack Reddings, the son of my boss and my co-driver. Jack was notorious for being loudmouthed and a bit of a troublemaker. I parked discreetly down the street and watched. My heart sank as Marcy and Jack exited the house together with my daughters. Jack was carrying a trucker's rig bag, and it was clear they were dropping the girls off at school after missing the bus. Before loading the kids into the car, Marcy and Jack shared an embrace that was far too intimate for mere acquaintances. The scene left no doubt. This wasn't a new development. I filmed the interaction on my phone. They didn't notice me as they drove off. My truck was unrecognizable in its new look. Once they were gone, I pulled into the driveway to investigate. The house initially seemed normal. My daughter's rooms were untouched, as was the master bedroom. Everything was in its place, down to the neatly made bed, which felt odd given the rushed morning. Still, something compelled me to dig deeper. I searched every corner, from the basement to the main floor, but found nothing unusual, until I noticed a faint glow coming from under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor. Curiosity got the better of me. That space was typically dark and unused, so the light was unexpected. I climbed the stairs and opened the door, stunned to discover the area fully renovated. Sunlight streamed through open curtains, illuminating a luxurious master suite with a king-sized bed, walk-in closets, a sitting area with a TV, and an ensuite bathroom. None of these changes had ever been discussed with me. On a small table, I found adult DVDs, something Marcy had always condemned. When I turned on the TV and played one of the discs, my stomach churned. The video featured Marcy performing a sexual act she had always refused to do with me. Watching her enthusiasm was devastating. The woman I thought I knew had embraced something she once called disgusting. On a coffee table across the room was a handmade card that read, "We love you, Uncle Jack," signed by my kids. I felt sick. The signs were undeniable. Jack wasn't just Marcy's lover. They were working to make him part of my children's lives. The disheveled bed, discarded lingerie I'd never seen before, and the unmistakable smell of recent closeness painted a grim picture. The walk-in closet told a similar story. One side held Jack's oversized clothes, while the other was filled with Marcy's, including provocative outfits she had never worn for me. The betrayal was glaringly obvious. I recorded everything in the room, making sure to document the oversized shirts, the DVDs, and even a framed photo of Jack with his parents. Standing in front of a mirror, I held up one of Jack's shirts to emphasize how it couldn't possibly belong to me. Finally, I rewound the disc and filmed its contents. Marcy and Jack, intimately involved, with Jack clearly visible. When I finished, I saved all the footage. The evidence was damning. There was no turning back from this revelation. I went down to the basement, grabbed my suitcase, and began throwing in my clothes. Before I left, I returned upstairs to the 3rd floor and took the disc containing the explicit video, slipping it into my luggage. Once everything was packed, I left the bags by the front door and moved on to handle more pressing issues. The first call I made was to my father to check on the status of the store project. He told me construction was progressing well, including a 3-bedroom apartment being built on the 2nd floor. He also mentioned we had secured a franchise deal, which would be a major advantage. When I asked how long until everything was ready, he estimated about 10 weeks. "I'll take over the store and live in the apartment," I said. Also, I need you to find me a solid civil attorney and a top-notch divorce lawyer. I'll explain later. After that, I called the farmer who had sold us the land and asked if he had a room I could use until the apartment was finished. Without hesitation, he offered me a place to stay, refusing any payment and reminding me of how much he appreciated what my family had done for him. I let him know I'd arrived the next day. By mid-morning, I walked into my boss, Jace Redding's office, and quit on the spot. Naturally, he asked why, so I showed him footage of the finished third floor of my house, including a framed photo of him with his family. His face darkened as he realized what he was looking at. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice tense. "It's from my own house," I replied flatly. "That part of the house wasn't supposed to be remodeled." I followed that by showing him a short clip of his son, Jack, engaged in an explicit act with my wife, Marcy. Jace, a man known for his staunch religious beliefs, looked utterly disgusted. "That's my wife," I said, keeping my tone steady. "This is why I'm leaving. I need to focus on fighting for custody of my daughters." Jace didn't hesitate to call his accountant, instructing him to cut my final paycheck and add a $10,000 bonus as compensation for his son's betrayal. He looked at me apologetically. "Are you sure the kids aren't his?" he asked hesitantly. "I'm certain," I said. "This has been going on for some time, but not long enough for that." He suggested I consider a DNA test, but I told him that Jack could request one if he felt the need. I also asked Jace to keep everything I'd shared with him private, as I wanted Marcy to discover later that her secret was out. "I'm ashamed of what my son's done," Jace said after a long silence. "When he gets back, he's finished. We've had rumors about him being involved with married women, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." True to his word, Jace fired Jack and cut him out of the family inheritance, citing his disgraceful behavior and the injury he'd caused. Later, after cashing my check, draining the joint accounts, and settling my bill at the auto shop, I went to my daughter's school. I arranged to meet with them in the presence of their guidance counselor to ensure there was no chance of my intentions being misinterpreted. During the conversation, I learned that Jack had been living upstairs for 3 years. Marcy had introduced him to the girls as a distant cousin, and over time, he became a regular presence in their lives. Eventually, Marcy insisted the girls refer to him as Uncle. I decided it was time to be honest with them. I explained that Jack wasn't family, but was, in fact, their mother's lover. I told them about the divorce, and that, for now, they would remain with Marcy until I could establish a stable home and fight for custody. The counselor supported my approach and provided her contact information. "Tell your lawyer to reach out to me," she said. "I'll give a statement. Too many fathers lose their kids unfairly in situations like this." I hugged my daughters and watched them return to class, feeling a renewed sense of purpose to build a better life for them. Before heading home, I stopped at a flower shop and asked for the oldest, most wilted flowers they had. After some initial confusion, the clerk brought out a batch from the trash, which I had boxed up. Back at the house, I placed the box on the master bed, along with the card my daughters had signed for Uncle Jack and a shredded piece of Marcy's baby doll lingerie. I'd cut it apart with her sewing scissors as a final touch. After that, I loaded my tools into my truck, securing them with a tarp to keep them safe. While I worked, my neighbor, John, came over. "I guess you finally found out about Marcy's second husband," he said casually. "Second husband?" I asked, startled. "Yeah, that's what we all called him. He's been around for years." "I just learned today," I admitted. "It's been going on for at least 3 years. I quit my job this morning. I'm going to focus on proving I can provide a stable home and fight for custody of my daughters." John offered to let me park my truck in his garage and suggested I stick around to see how things played out that evening. I agreed and moved the truck. That night, I watched from John's garage as Marcy arrived home. She went straight to the bedroom, where she found the box on the bed. At first, she smiled, likely thinking it was a gift from Jack. She picked up the card and set it aside, then reached for the baby doll lingerie. Her smile faltered as she realized it had been torn to shreds. Confusion flashed across her face, but she didn't seem to suspect anything yet. Finally, she opened the box of dead flowers. The stench hit her immediately, and she recoiled, looking both nauseous and puzzled. She seemed to assume the gesture was Jack's doing, perhaps an odd way of signaling the end of their affair. It was clear she hadn't connected the dots that I was the one behind it all. This was just the beginning. I had much more planned. I watched as my 2 daughters got off the school bus and headed toward the house. A text from Lauren popped up on my phone. Call us, but don't say anything. We want you to hear what we have to tell Mom. She needs to hear the truth, just like you've always taught us. I explained the situation to my neighbor John, who was still nearby. When I put the call on speaker, we'll need to stay completely quiet, I told him. That way we can both hear everything clearly. The girls walked straight to their mother's bedroom. Marcy was still sitting there, clearly shaken and confused by the messages I had left earlier. She didn't seem to understand the full weight of what was happening. After greeting their mom as though it were just another day, my daughters began their conversation. Dad called us out of class today. He said he wanted to talk to us in private, Linda started. From her expression, I could tell they had her attention. She looked concerned, unsure of what was coming. He met us in the school counselor's office, Lauren added. We didn't understand why, especially since you told us he wouldn't be home until 6. Then he asked Miss Connor, the counselor, to stay with us while he talked. The first thing Dad asked was, "Who is Uncle Jack and how long has he been staying with us?" Linda continued. I explained that you told us he was a distant cousin who moved back to the area. Marcy's face changed immediately. Fear began to settle in. It was clear now that she knew who had left the messages in the bedroom. Dad had no idea you had the 3rd floor renovated while he was on the road. You said it was supposed to be a surprise for him, Lauren said. But now we know that wasn't true. We kept your secret like you asked. And wow, was it ever a surprise for Dad? Linda added with a bitter edge. He told us he didn't find out about it until today, Lauren went on. Mom, you've always taught us not to lie, but I guess we figured out that it's okay for you to lie. To him, to us, to everyone in the family. Marcy started crying, tears streaming down her face. She didn't interrupt, she just listened. Dad didn't know Jack had been renting the 3rd floor for over 3 years, Linda said. We had to explain to him that whenever he was away, you never slept in the bed you shared with him when he was home. We knew because the bed never needed to be made before you left for work, Lauren pointed out. Marcy's face turned pale. Her daughters were laying everything bare, and even something as small as an unmade bed had unraveled her. The same mother who always told them to start their day by making their beds was now caught by her own rules. We told Dad we never actually saw you and Uncle Jack together, but we did see you coming downstairs from the 3rd floor in the mornings when he wasn't home, Lauren said. Dad told us that he and you are getting a divorce because Jack isn't family. He's your lover, the man you've been hiding from him for years. Linda's voice grew firmer. Dad told us that you've been using him for a long time to support Jack's lifestyle and yours, not for the good of our family. He said that makes him feel like his entire life with you has been a lie. He also said that since he quit his job today, he's going to start looking for something local so he can fight for custody of us. Miss Connor explained that Dad had no choice but to quit. Linda continued. She said the court wouldn't consider giving custody to a long-haul trucker. After he said goodbye, we went back to class, but it was hard to focus. Marcy sat on the bed, her body shaking as she cried. She couldn't deny what they were saying. It was all true. She knew Heath was preparing to fight for custody, and as a social worker, she was well aware of what the court would consider in their evaluations. Eventually, we broke down in class, Linda said quietly. Miss Connor had to pull us out for the rest of the day to talk things through and help us calm down. We learned something new today, Mom, Lauren said, her voice cutting. Sleeping with another man while you're married is infidelity. Miss Connor said it's the biggest insult one spouse can give the other. If it mattered to you, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, Linda added. Miss Connor wondered how you thought you could live with 2 husbands and no one would notice. Marcy seemed to mutter something to herself, but it wasn't audible. She must have been trying to rationalize things, probably thinking Heath was her husband and Jack was just a lover, but even she seemed to realize that to everyone else, it looked like she'd been living a double life. Lauren's voice broke the silence. Linda and I talked, and we decided that you must not only hate Dad, but probably hate us too. That's the only explanation for why you did this for so long. Linda chimed in, her words sharp and deliberate. Miss Connor told us that no one who loves or respects their spouse would ever treat them the way you treated Dad. She said what you did is beyond cruel. Marcy's sobs grew louder, her body trembling. She never expected to be confronted like this, least of all by her own daughters. Their words were blunt and unflinching, forcing her to see the consequences of her actions. Before we got on the bus, Linda said, Miss Connor asked if we felt okay to go home or if we needed her to drive us. We told her we'd be fine. We wanted time to talk. She also said she would testify about what happened today if it comes up in court, Lauren added. She's seen too many men ruined by lies like this and said she has a duty to tell the truth. We whispered a lot on the bus ride home, Linda concluded. We've made some decisions of our own. Marcy completely broke down, burying her face in her hands. Mom, Lauren began firmly, we may only be 12, but it won't be long before we're old enough to decide who we want to live with. Miss Connor told us that when we turn 13, we can make that decision ourselves. And we've already decided it's going to be Dad, Lauren continued without hesitation. We're going downstairs to call Grandma. She'll come and get us, and I'm sure she and Grandpa will let us stay with them until Dad has things sorted out. That way, you and Jack can have the whole house to yourselves. She turned to Linda. Let's go pack and make the call. Before leaving the room, Linda turned back to their mother. One last question, Mom. Were you trying to make us bond with Uncle Jack so it would be easier for us to accept him as your second husband without Dad knowing? Her tone was cutting, because it sure seems like you were. Marcy didn't respond. She just sat there, devastated, tears streaming down her face, as her daughters walked out to call their grandmother. Her daughters had clearly inherited their father's logical approach to problems. They had pieced together the situation with unflinching clarity and drawn their own conclusions. I sent Marcy a quick text. What you found on the bed? That was me. Let your so-called common-law husband know I'll be suing him for financial support for you and the girls. From my vantage point with binoculars, I watched her slowly piece it all together. As she realized that I planned to present everything, her lies, her hidden lifestyle, her betrayal, in court, it became clear she understood she would lose any chance of keeping custody of our daughters. Marcy was defeated. She could see there was no good ending to this. The looming lawsuits and exposure of her relationship with Jack would destroy both of them. John and I timed it. Less than 15 minutes later, her parents arrived. John cracked open his front door, curious if the voices from next door would carry. They did, and they were loud enough to leave no doubt that tempers were flaring. Marcy's mother tore into her as she led the girls out the front door. Her anger was palpable, but it was her father who delivered the most brutal blow. Well, he said coldly, since you've driven Heath out of your life, I guess once things fall apart with Jack, you'll just find another long-distance driver to replace him. Jack's already shown he doesn't respect you. He's perfectly fine with you sleeping with someone else. And you've made it clear, by your behavior, that one man will never be enough to satisfy you. From where we stood, John and I could see Marcy crumble under her father's words. She was sobbing so hard she couldn't respond. Her mother added with icy finality, We'll be contacting child services tomorrow to figure out the next steps. After all, it was your daughters who called us and explained why they wanted out of this house. They made us proud. They've clearly been raised well. Unfortunately, we can't say the same about you. John shut the door, then headed to his kitchen to grab a couple of beers. I followed him. Your daughters nailed it, Heath, John said, handing me a beer. You should be proud. To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us the third floor was a rental unit. She claimed you needed extra income and had decided to rent it out. That's a complete lie, I replied. The house and land were fully paid for. I remodeled the entire place myself, floor by floor, just because I had the time and wanted to. So she lied from day one, John said, shaking his head. Where do you think the money came from to finish the third floor? Not from us, I said firmly. I haven't seen a single cent of income from that so-called rental. My guess? Jack used his trust fund to pay for it, and he probably reimbursed himself later. I pulled out my phone and selected Marcy's contact. Let me know if you can spot her, I told John. I want to send a text and see how she reacts. A couple of minutes later, John gave me the signal. She's back in her bedroom. Looks like she's trying to calm down. I typed out a short, blunt message and hit send. Hey, to the queen of open invitations, Jace Redding and I both want to know, given your long-term relationship with his son, are Linda and Lauren mine or Jack's? Jace plans to file a lawsuit to find out. John's reaction was immediate. Oh my God, she's lost it, he said. She just threw her phone against the wall. He peeked again. Now she's on the bed sobbing like crazy. John turned back to me with a curious grin. What on earth did you send her? Just the truth, I replied calmly. Jace told me he's been hearing rumors for years about Jack being involved with a married woman. He said the husband didn't know. I figured it was time to ask a question that needs answering for everyone involved. John's face turned pale. He knew Jace's reputation and how far he'd go to uncover the truth. About 30 minutes later, I asked John to check on Marcy again. "She's in the living room now, sitting on the couch," he reported. I sent her the final blow, a 5-minute video clip of her performing an explicit act with Jack. The clip ended with Jack's face clearly visible. Along with it, I sent a single line. "Who filmed this?" After a moment, I sent a follow-up. "I took the disc. Maybe I'll figure out the answer when I watch more." John returned moments later, wide-eyed. "Marcy's lost it again. She threw up all over the living room rug." He looked at me, half laughing, half stunned. "I don't even want to know what you said this time." I left at 5 in the morning, heading out after sending videos to everyone we knew, friends and enemies alike. Along with the footage, I included a message. This is what I showed to Jace Redding when he asked why I had to quit my job. The second video was filmed in the same bedroom with help from someone else. Neighbors say Jack Redding is Marcy's second husband, and Marcy told them I was fine with the arrangement. That's a lie. I found out yesterday, and I'm filing for divorce and suing Jack Redding for numerous reasons. It wasn't going to be a pleasant morning for many people. After sending the messages, I stopped at a truck stop on the edge of town and ordered a hearty trucker's breakfast. From my booth, I could see my truck parked just outside the window as I sipped my coffee. Marcy's younger sister, Maureen, walked in and spotted me. "I'm so sorry, Heath. No man deserves what you've been through," she said softly. "Mind if I join you?" I nodded and she slid into the seat across from me. For a moment, we sat in silence as I savored the coffee. "Mom and Dad told me everything last night," Maureen began. "The girls explained everything after they got to their house. Just so you know, this blindsided all of us." She paused, then added, "If you ever change your number, please let us know. We won't share it with Marcy." "The number isn't changing," I assured her. "I was planning to quit in 2 months anyway. The girls are getting older, and I wanted to be home in the evenings as they start their teenage years." Maureen's frustration spilled out. "What was my sister thinking? There's no way in hell you would have agreed to her having a second husband." "I doubt we'll ever really know," I replied. "Maybe it started as something innocent that went too far, or maybe she's been hiding her true self all along. Either way, she seemed to enjoy herself. From what I've heard, it's been going on a lot longer than the 3 years we know about." "What do you mean?" Maureen asked, her brow furrowing. "When I told Jace why I was quitting, he mentioned hearing rumors that Jack had been involved with a married woman for years. He even asked if Linda and Lauren might be Jack's children." Maureen's face went pale. "Oh, God. Who else knows?" I pulled out my phone and let her read the text I had sent Marcy the night before. Then I showed her the message I sent out that morning. As she scrolled through, tears welled up in her eyes. She already knew things were bad, but now it was clear they were far worse. The video hinted that their relationship wasn't just between two people. "By the end of today, everyone will know," I said. "Jace will go public in his pursuit of the truth. It's possible both girls are mine or both are Jack's, or maybe neither of us is their biological father. And now I'm left wondering if the person filming that video was male or female." Maureen noticed the tears in my eyes and moved to sit beside me. She held my hand and we sat quietly until the waitress came to take our order. When the food arrived, I reluctantly let go of her hand so I could eat. Heath and Marcy had married young, both just 19. Maureen, as the youngest bridesmaid, had been quietly infatuated with Heath from the start. Even back then, she thought he was the most handsome man she'd ever seen. And that feeling had never faded. Heath had taken on the demanding job of long-distance trucking so Marcy could finish her degree. When she graduated and started working for the state, she chose a posting in their hometown. At the time, Maureen didn't understand why, but now it was clear. Marcy wanted to be close to Jack, her first love, despite their parents' disapproval. Maureen glanced at Heath. She knew he wasn't ready to hear all of this. Over the years, Heath had been the person she leaned on, the one who helped her see life's problems from every angle. He had a way of turning mountains into molehills. She loved him deeply, and had always compared every man she met to him. No one ever measured up, but now she had to find a way to keep Heath in her life. When the time was right, she would make her feelings known. She was convinced that Marcy had married the wrong sister. "Heath, do you know where you'll be staying?" Maureen asked, breaking the silence. "Linda and Lauren told Mom and Dad they want to live with you. They're angry and hurt, but incredibly proud of their father. They told Mom and Dad they'd tell the court they want to live with you," she continued. "In the meantime, I can bring them to you on weekends if you'd like." I pulled out my notes and handed her an address. My dad and I are building a gas station and convenience store near here. I'm staying with the farmer who rents the land from us for now, but I'll be moving into the 3-bedroom apartment we're building above the store once it's finished." "Why out there?" Maureen asked, puzzled. "We own 10 acres at each corner of the intersection," I explained. "We're planning to subdivide the land into 3/4-acre lots after developing it. There's nothing else in the area, so the store will be convenient for locals and a draw for others." "How did you even find it?" she asked, surprised. "I was cutting across the country to save time and stumbled on a sign at a 4-way stop. The traffic flow caught my attention. It'll support a business," I replied. Maureen nodded thoughtfully, understanding my reasoning. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the weight of the morning lingered. We both knew the coming days would be tumultuous, but for now, there was a sense of quiet understanding between us. After finishing breakfast, I picked up the check. Maureen leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, just like she always did, and smiled. "Heath," she said softly, "just remember, there are a lot of people who have always loved you for the good man you are." Her words stayed with me as I drove. I called my dad and filled him in on everything. Without hesitation, he promised to find me one of the best divorce attorneys available. The drive to my destination was about 75 miles. By the time I arrived at the construction site, it was a little past 8:30 a.m. A smile crept across my face when I saw the progress. Dad wasn't holding back. The design included 8 fuel pumps for cars and smaller commercial trucks, plus 2 designated for big rigs. The foundations for the spill containment system were already in place, and construction on the building's frame had started. Stepping into the construction trailer, I studied the plans Dad was working from. They were similar to his other projects, but this one included a spacious 400-square-foot apartment on the second floor. Seeing that addition made me smile. He clearly recognized the area's potential. After a couple of hours at the site, I headed over to the farm. Bill Robinson greeted me warmly as I pulled up. He admired my restored Ford truck, reminiscing about the days when vehicles were built tough, with speed and durability in mind. As I parked, Bill's wife, whom he fondly referred to as the Missus, called us in for lunch. It was a hearty farmer's meal, and she chuckled at how much I ate. Afterward, I helped her clean up, drying dishes while she put away leftovers. She noticed my bare ring finger, but didn't comment. By the time we finished, a fresh pot of coffee was ready. We sat down, and I spent the next 2 hours recounting the chaos of the past 2 days. Bill assured me that my daughters and their Aunt Maureen would be welcome at the farm any time. "It'd be nice to have kids around again," he said. "Gives me an excuse to fire up the grill." I texted Maureen, inviting her to visit every Friday and stay through the weekend. She replied almost immediately, "It's a date." Later that afternoon, I reviewed the disc on my laptop. The video, unfortunately, didn't show any other faces. Using my phone as a hotspot, I sent everything to my father, including the contact information for Miss Connor, the school counselor. I also asked him to work with Jace Redding to pinpoint Jack's location and serve him as soon as possible. Marcy would be served at her office in town. For good measure, I uploaded the incriminating video and sent it along. Out of spite, I sent Marcy a text. "I've seen the whole video. Let's just say it's not award-winning material. Plenty of others have done better performances." By the time school let out, Maureen and my daughters were on the road. Maureen, a tax specialist, was thankfully in her slow season, giving her the flexibility to drive. The girls couldn't stop texting me, sending updates every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75-mile trip flew by, and they texted one last time when they reached the driveway. Linda and Lauren leaped out of the car and ran straight into my arms. Bill and the Missus, whose name I finally learned was Betty, welcomed everyone warmly. The girls were thrilled with the room Betty had prepared for them. While she finished making dinner, Bill gave everyone a tour, pointing out the swing set, a swimming pond, and small motorcycles they could ride, with my permission. After dinner, the girls and I cleaned up the kitchen while Betty put away the dishes. Bill entertained them with stories about the farm and promised them a busy weekend of fun activities. Once the kids went to bed, Maureen and I had some time to talk. "Heath," she said, her voice heavy with emotion, "these past few days have been a whirlwind. Everything's coming out now. Jack was the boy Marcy used to sneak out to see when we were kids. That's how long they've been involved." I nodded, the pieces finally clicking into place. "It all makes sense now. I was the safe, dependable one. Jack was her wild side, and he took full advantage of that. He'll run when this all comes crashing down, and Marcy will be left with nothing." Maureen sighed. Mom and Dad spoke with child services. If you give written permission, they can keep the girls until you're settled. They also interviewed the girls and told us there's no way Marcy will get custody. Her lifestyle disqualifies her completely. Her words hit me hard, and tears started streaming down my face. I tried to tell her to leave so I could process everything, but she refused. Instead, she stayed by my side. Meanwhile, Marcy sat at her kitchen table, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Thursday had been relatively quiet, but Friday had been anything but. At work, she was served with legal papers. Jace Redding was suing to determine if he was biologically related to her daughters. The truth was, she couldn't even be certain. It had been so long since the girls were conceived that the details were hazy. She had underestimated Heath. At first, she dismissed his threats as anger-driven outbursts, but when she saw the text he sent to all their friends and family, everything changed. The message was clear, and the damage was irreversible. Her lawyer explained that Jack legally qualified as her common law partner from the moment she moved him into the house. That meant Heath's lawsuit against Jack would likely succeed, and the only question now was how much Jack would owe. The lawyer also told her that Heath's long-standing dedication to his family would make him a sympathetic figure in divorce court. She realized too late that he had every advantage, while she had none. For the first time, Marcy grasped the full extent of what she'd lost. Heath wasn't just going to win, he was going to move on without her, leaving her to deal with the wreckage. If Marcy had been able to prove Jack was contributing financially, such as by providing bank statements showing consistent rent payments over the last 3 years, her situation might have been different. Instead, there was no evidence to support that he had contributed anything toward household expenses. The court was left with the impression that Jack had been nothing more than a kept man. The real blow came at the end of the day when her supervisor called her into the office. The news was direct and devastating. "Marcy, I'm aware that you visited Mr. and Mrs. Klaus Rubenstein after hours on Thursday regarding a custody issue. They explained everything that happened the night before and asked for the state's guidance." Her supervisor's tone was icy. "I spoke with the children and advised the grandparents that if they obtained written consent from the father, the state would recognize them as temporary custodians until the court decides the case. And yes, I know they're your parents." Marcy's stomach dropped. Her supervisor continued, unflinching. "I can't transfer you yet, but as soon as a position opens elsewhere, I will. I also can't terminate you, but your reputation as a social worker in this area is ruined. No one will take your word on anything. Effective immediately, you're relegated to office work, and your entire caseload is being reassigned." Marcy had no defense. She knew she had only herself to blame. Her relentless pursuit of Jack had led her here. And now the consequences were undeniable. Saturday was packed with activity at the farm. Linda and Lauren were ecstatic when Bill walked them through the basics of operating the small motorcycles parked in the yard. Watching them, it was clear they were naturals. After 2 hours, Bill called it a day. "You'll be sore tomorrow if you don't stop now," he said. "And since you're already sweaty, go cool off in the pond." Betty and Maureen were growing closer, sharing laughter and stories as they prepped dinner. Around 4 in the afternoon, the girls were called inside to help. Since they'd never done much cooking, I went to check on them and found them peeling potatoes and chopping onions around the kitchen table, under Betty's watchful eye. Meanwhile, Bill fired up the grill to cook steaks, and I pitched in where I could. Dinner was a hit. Perfectly grilled steaks, potato salad, and baked beans, served outdoors at the picnic table. What struck me was that neither the TV nor their phones had been touched all day. It was as if the twins were discovering an entirely new way of life. By evening, they decided to head to bed early, worn out from the day's adventures. The rest of us stayed up, sharing a few beers and playing cards before calling it a night. Sunday after lunch, Maureen and the girls headed home. Before they left, Maureen handed me a handwritten witnessed letter granting Klaus and Betty temporary custody of the twins. Early Monday morning, Klaus called to thank me for getting the letter to him so quickly. He had taken it to the office himself, where it was copied for official records. The state had issued a legal notice confirming their temporary custodianship. As we chatted, Klaus shared details about Marcy and Jack's long-standing relationship, opening my eyes to things I hadn't known. On Friday morning, Jack Redding was served with legal papers in Austin, Texas, while picking up a shipment of medical equipment. At the same time, Marcy was served at the social services office. That afternoon, I received a text from Maureen asking for my waist size. When I asked why, she replied, "So we can go swimming with the girls." I texted back, 34. Later, while on a walk, I got a message from Marcy. It read, "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I responded bluntly, "Nothing to talk about. Your parents and Maureen filled me in on everything, from sneaking out to meet Jack to where you are now. What I'm trying to figure out is this. If he's always been the one, why did you marry me?" She didn't reply. When Maureen arrived with the girls, their excitement was contagious. As Linda and Lauren ran to hug me, Maureen's radiant smile lit up the moment. After a warm hug from her, the girls asked me a quiet question, to which I nodded. The twins ran to greet Bill and Betty, and Maureen surprised me with a firm kiss on the lips, catching me off guard. "You need to hear what the girls just asked," I told her. We turned to listen as Maureen slipped her hand into mine. Lauren began, "We were wondering if it's okay to call you Grandpa and Grandma." Linda added, "Only if that's all right with you." Betty teared up, clearly overwhelmed. "Of course," she said, her voice trembling. Later she confided that she'd always longed to hear those words, but thought she never would, having been unable to have children of her own. After dinner, I updated Maureen on the situation. "Both Marcy and Jack have been served. It's official now." I showed her the last text I'd received from Marcy in my response. "She can't justify her actions," Maureen said. "If she tried, she'd have to face the truth about herself. And I don't think she's capable of that." "Enough about your sister," I replied. "When are you going to find someone who loves you the way you deserve?" "Don't be surprised, Heath," she said with a soft smile. "I already have. The real challenge is getting him to see it." The next morning, Bill and I, both early risers, were enjoying freshly perked coffee outside. "Heath," he said, his tone thoughtful, "Betty is my second wife. My first did to me what Marcy's done to you." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "To remind you not to let your pain blind you to what's in front of you. Maureen has been here for you since day one. When you're ready, ask yourself why." His words lingered. I began to wonder, could Maureen want more? And if so, why? "What made you realize Betty was interested in you?" I asked. Bill chuckled. "A cast iron skillet to the head, figuratively speaking. She caught a neighbor girl flirting with me and made it clear how she felt. We couldn't have kids of our own, so we fostered for years. It gave us a purpose and a bond." His story gave me a lot to think about as I watched the sunrise over the farm. Our conversation ended as the rest of the household began to stir. The sound of voices and movement signaled the start of another busy day. After the twins spent 3 hours riding the motorcycles, they were ready to cool off, so we all headed to the pond. Bill and Betty brought down lawn chairs and watched us play a lively game of beach ball volleyball. Maureen looked incredible in her white bikini, her auburn hair pinned back, and her movements full of energy and grace. As she chased after the ball, her laughter rang out, and her confidence was impossible to ignore. I found myself captivated by her, something Bill's recent words had made me see differently. As we walked to the pond, I couldn't help but notice her effortless stride and the slight sway of her hips. The pond was deeper than I expected, fed by a small creek with a charming waterfall Bill had created by stacking railroad ties in a low section of the land. Our games were lighthearted and filled with laughter. We teamed up differently each round, with my daughters taking turns diving from my shoulders while I lifted them up from beneath the water. Eventually, Bill and Betty headed back to prepare dinner, and Linda and Lauren decided to join them. Maureen and I stayed in the pond, enjoying the quiet. Feeling playful, I dove beneath the surface and came up between her legs, flipping her into the water. She emerged laughing, her hair soaked, and her face glowing with joy. She swam closer, and as our eyes met, something shifted. I saw an emotion I hadn't recognized before. Without a word, we leaned into each other, our lips meeting in a kiss that was electric, filled with more passion and connection than I'd ever experienced. "Wow," I murmured, pulling back slightly. "That was intense." She smiled, her voice soft but confident. "You don't know how long I've waited for this." We embraced, the water surrounding us as we held each other tightly, sharing more kisses, our connection deepening with every touch. The world around us faded away until Bill's distant call broke through. "Supper will be ready in 20 minutes. We reluctantly broke apart and headed back to the house to change. As soon as we stepped inside, Betty gave us a knowing look. "Well, it seems like things are starting to fall into place," she said, grinning. "How did you manage to clue him in?" she asked Maureen. "She didn't," Bill interjected, laughing. "I told him about your legendary cast-iron frying pan swing." The twins overheard and demanded the story, which Bill happily shared, much to their delight. After supper, when the girls had gone to bed, tired out from fresh air and activity, I sat on the porch swing, enjoying the stillness. Maureen joined me, settling in beside me. I wrapped an arm around her as she leaned against my shoulder. "My mom figured it out last week when I brought the twins home," she said. "She told me I looked happier than I had in years, so I guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought." "How did she take it?" I asked. "I'm sure she has concerns with everything going on." "She asked if anything was happening yet, and I told her no," Maureen replied. "Then she asked how long I'd been in love with you. I told her, since the summer before you married Marcy." I was stunned. That long? And it took all of this for me to notice? I was expecting a lecture, Maureen admitted, smiling softly. Instead, she said if it works out, she'll help Dad come around. Then she told me something I didn't know. Her dad was my aunt's cast-off, and she thanks her sister for that every single day. As Maureen kissed me goodbye on Sunday, Lauren turned to Linda, who seemed surprised. "Aunt Maureen has been in love with Dad for years," she whispered. "It took what Mom did for him to finally figure it out. If Aunt Maureen gets her way, they'll be married as soon as the divorce is final." As they drove off, I couldn't help but wonder how my daughter had figured it out so easily. Monday morning, Bill suggested we take a walk. As we crossed the bridge over the creek to a nearby section of land, he gestured to the spot. "This would be a great place to build a house," he said. "That way Linda and Lauren could come over any time to ride the bikes, or the horses Betty and I are planning to buy." "Whose idea was this?" I asked, curious. "Betty and Maureen's. They're planning to pitch it to you next week," he said with a laugh. Klaus called later that morning with surprising news. Jace Redding had obtained a court order for blood tests to determine Lauren and Linda's paternity. Klaus was devastated to learn there was any doubt. He'd believed Marcy's affair with Jack had only been going on for the past 3 years. He was so upset by the revelation that he marched into the social services office and confronted Marcy in front of her co-workers. "As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me," he declared, his voice echoing through the building. Later, my mother-in-law called to inform me that Miss Connor had provided a notarized statement to my lawyer. She mentioned that Jack would be back in town on Wednesday and suggested I stay nearby to keep an eye on things. I arranged to stay with John Sexsmith on Tuesday night. Bill lent me his vehicle so I could slip into town unnoticed. As dusk settled, I called John to confirm he was home before pulling into his driveway. John greeted me warmly, ready to share updates on everything that had been happening. The night felt heavy with anticipation, but I was prepared to face whatever came next. It seemed Marcy had been entertaining another guest at the house since I left, and he was there even now. Peering through John's binoculars, I immediately recognized the man. It was Jack's older married brother, Jason. I called Jace Redding and asked him to come to the address where I was staying. When he arrived, I handed him the key to my house. "You need to see this for yourself," I told him. "You won't believe what I've uncovered." I explained that I had discovered the identity of the person filming Jack and Marcy. It was Jason, and at that very moment, Jason and Marcy were together in the third-floor bedroom. John and I watched as Jace walked across the street, unlocked the door, and entered my house. "What do you think he's going to do when he finds out?" John asked. "Jace is a proud man," I replied. "How he reacts depends entirely on what his pride drives him to do. I just hope it doesn't push him past his breaking point." Moments later, a bang echoed. Fearful, John called emergency. When police, fire, and ambulance arrived, we saw Marcy stumble out of the house, half-dressed, as Jason was led away in handcuffs. Concern replaced our initial amusement when Jace was carried out on a stretcher. John turned on his police scanner, and we learned Jace had entered the third-floor bedroom, and Jason, mistaking him for an intruder, shot him. Thankfully, the wound was to his shoulder and not life-threatening. Marcy, now fully dressed, spotted us outside. Her face went pale when she saw me. "I can't believe she was involved with both brothers," John muttered. "I suspected someone else, but not him," I replied. "I feel for Jace. He didn't deserve this." The next morning, I visited my in-laws. Klaus greeted me early, and over coffee, I explained the events. His wife, Rose, was stunned, but welcomed me warmly. When Linda and Lauren came downstairs, they were thrilled to see me. After taking them to school, I spoke with Rose. We both agreed. Marcy had never truly loved me. Later, I visited Jace in the hospital. His wife hugged me tearfully. "This isn't your fault," I reassured her. "You're not responsible for your children's choices." Jace managed to smile. "You've always kept your cool, Heath." "I've come close," I admitted. "But I'm afraid if I ever lost it, I wouldn't stop." Jace chuckled. "Well, Jason's in jail. Jack's lost his trust fund, and the fallout is a mess." Want to manage the fleet again? I declined, explaining I was pursuing a new chapter. At the transportation center, I watched Jack clock out for the last time. True to form, he left in a rage. Concerned, I asked John to keep an eye on my house. That evening, I surprised Maureen with roses and an invitation to dinner. Her emotional reaction confirmed her feelings. After dinner, John called with urgent news. Jack had returned home drunk and armed, blaming Marcy for everything. Confronting her with a Colt, neighbors heard bangs and called police. Marcy's injuries were severe. Despite surgery, she died from internal bleeding. I broke the news to Maureen, who called her parents. We met them at the hospital. The hardest part was telling Linda and Lauren. Klaus and I agreed on a closed casket funeral. As we planned the arrangements, I reflected on how Marcy's choices had destroyed so many lives. After the burial, Klaus pulled me aside. I had the girls tested. They aren't related to Jace. Also, how long has Maureen loved you? Since the summer before Marcy and I married, I admitted. Klaus smiled faintly. Her sister throwing me away was the best thing that ever happened to me. If you and Maureen work out, you'll have my support. That marked the start of rebuilding my life. 5 years later, I watched Linda and Lauren wait for the bus while Maureen, now my wife, cared for our 2 preschool-age sons. Bill and Betty had become devoted grandparents. Our gas station and store became the heart of the growing village, now with a post office. On warm days, I enjoyed walking from our house by the pond to work. Jason and his wife visited often. Jason had served a short sentence, while Jack was in prison for manslaughter. Jack's ex-wife and kids moved to our village, starting fresh. Our community's name came from a sign Bill painted. We're all here because of circumstances. The name stuck, and so did our new beginning.
Before that turning point, Judith and Rick's relationship was strong, built on admiration and shared dreams. They met 15 years ago, fresh out of Rutgers University, and quickly bonded at a friend's party. After 2 years of dating, they moved in together and later married. They built a stable home and had 2 sons, Will and Robert, whom they raised with love. Judith had a successful career as a designer, and Rick was a supportive husband. However, as Judith's career took off, things shifted. Her long work hours began to strain the family. Though Rick was patient, subtle cracks in their relationship started to appear. Judith reassured herself that she could juggle her career and family life, believing she had it all under control. Judith often reflected on her good fortune, feeling lucky for her full life. At 40-something, she still admired her appearance, a tall, fit blonde with youthful eyes. These thoughts vanished as she packed for her upcoming trip to San Diego. She folded her clothes carefully and made sure her luggage was ready before Rick and the boys returned. The trip was a reward from Dalton Industries for a successful project launch. Judith was excited, though Rick hadn't been thrilled about her being away again. She had worked hard to convince him, and he eventually agreed, though not happily. Judith, a top designer at Casual Creations, specialized in packaging design. Her recent project was a success, and she was proud of her work, even though it meant spending long hours away from her family. As she prepared dinner that evening, she thought about the previous night with Rick. Their lovemaking had been intense, more passionate than usual. The memory made her want to make the evening special before leaving. Dinner was ready, and everything was on schedule as Rick and the boys arrived. Judith didn't want to dwell on the past. Right now, her focus was on her family, her husband Rick and their 2 boys, Will and Robert. Will, nearly 9, was carefree, while 7-year-old Robert was more serious. They balanced each other well, and Judith loved them equally. She and Rick had met at a party 15 years ago, instantly connecting despite attending Rutgers without crossing paths. After dating for 2 years, they moved in together and eventually married. She cherished the memory of Rick's proposal, and their life had been wonderful. When they were ready, they were blessed with 2 healthy boys. Judith had it all, though a slight chill ran through her at the thought, which she brushed off as nerves about her trip. She greeted her boys with hugs as they came home, Rick following close behind. She embraced Rick, noticing his tension. Although he relaxed, there was a shadow in his eyes. "You don't have to go, you know. We all want you to stay," Rick said, looking into her eyes. "It's too late now. It's just a quick business trip," she replied, attempting another hug, but he moved toward the powder room. Dinner was lively, with the boys talking about their day and upcoming school projects. Will wanted to make an erupting volcano for the science fair, while Robert preferred something unique. Their banter was good-natured, and Rick let them go on before eventually stepping in. Judith enjoyed the moment, but soon it was time to get ready. Rick insisted they'd clean up later. Packed and ready, Judith hugged and kissed her boys before sending them off to play. She turned to Rick. "I'll miss you all. It's just 3 nights. You'll pick me up Wednesday, right?" Rick nodded with a smile. "Don't worry, it's all set. You go enjoy yourself." Judith noticed the same darkness in his eyes, but before she could say anything, a car horn interrupted them. "That's Rachel. I'd better go," she said, giving Rick a quick hug and kiss before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. She glanced back, but Rick had already gone inside. Feeling uneasy, she told herself it was just her imagination. In the car, Rachel joked, 3 days at Redstone. Too bad you're so happily married. Could have been fun." Judith laughed, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too late to turn back now. At the airport, Judith checked her bags, went through security, and found her gate. Just as she sat down, Wes Southern joined her with a grin. "Ready for San Diego? Too bad we can't skip the meetings and just stay in bed," he joked, referencing their previous encounters. Judith smiled despite her unease, knowing they'd have plenty of time together during the trip. She and Wes had started their affair 2 months earlier after a long day at work. Exhausted, they fell asleep on her office couch, and when she woke, she mistook Wes's touch for Rick's. Guilt battled pleasure, but she gave in. What began as a one-time encounter soon became more frequent, though they kept it casual and secret, using protection to avoid complications. Over time, her guilt faded, and she resumed closeness with Rick, though something still felt off. Judith convinced herself the affair wasn't serious and that it didn't affect her marriage. This trip, although it gave her time alone with Wes, still felt work-related and not like a full-blown affair. She rationalized that everything would return to normal afterward, and she would refocus on Rick. In San Diego, after checking in, Judith called home and spoke to her boys for an hour. But when she asked for Rick, they said he was upstairs and quickly hung up. She was confused. Why had Rick been so quick to get rid of her? Could he suspect something? She brushed off the thought, assuming it was just guilt, and met Wes for dinner. After dinner, they headed to her room, eager to be together. The night was filled with passion, and they eventually fell asleep before dawn. But in the early morning, as Judith drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she felt a deep sense of loneliness and sadness. The intensity of it woke her, repeating, "No, no, no." Drenched in sweat, she got up and stood in the shower, trying to wash away the feeling. The 3 days flew by, with nights filled with sex between Judith and Wes. Though it had always been exciting due to the secrecy, it soon began to feel routine. The thrill faded, and by the end of the trip, they both agreed to end the affair on good terms. Judith was eager to return home to Rick and the boys, but she hadn't been able to reach them the last 2 nights. Her calls went unanswered, with only the answering machine picking up. At the airport, she tried calling Rick's office, but there was no answer, so she left a reminder about picking her up. She boarded the plane and quickly fell asleep, despite Wes's joking comment about joining the Mile High Club. When they landed at Kennedy, Wes stayed behind as Judith headed to baggage claim, expecting Rick to be there, but instead of Rick, she saw a man holding a sign with her name. He explained he was sent to pick her up and take her home. Assuming Rick was just busy, Judith agreed and got into the limo. She called Rick's phone again, but only got his voicemail. Now she was starting to worry. The drive seemed endless, and all her attempts to contact Rick failed. When they finally reached her house, it looked dark and deserted. Before she could get out, the driver handed her an envelope with her name on it in Rick's handwriting. Feeling panicked, she grabbed her bag and rushed inside. The house was quiet with only a few lights on. She searched every room, but no one was home. Upstairs in their bedroom, everything seemed normal until she noticed Rick's closet door was open, something he never left that way. When she looked closer, she realized all of his clothes were gone. Rick had left. Feeling sick to her stomach, Judith slowly walked into her boys' room. The beds were made, but their computers, favorite posters, and clothes were all gone. Panic rising, she ran downstairs searching for a note, then remembered the manila envelope. Grabbing it from the kitchen table, she tore it open and collapsed into a chair. Inside were photos, a report from Spaulding Investigations, and a document titled Decree for Dissolution of Marriage. Judith screamed. Overwhelmed by grief, she cried uncontrollably, pleading for another chance, throwing dishes in her despair until she finally passed out. When she woke to the morning sunlight, she numbly gathered the papers she'd thrown across the room. The first thing she saw were the photos, incriminating shots of her and Wes. She rushed to the sink, her stomach turning, then returned to the table, pushing the rest of the pictures aside. The report detailed her affair, with dates, times, and photo references documenting her betrayal. Judith didn't have the strength to read more and laid the report down. The legal document, thick and official, sat there, but she couldn't face reading it. Instead, she opened the envelope with a note from Rick. The letter began, "Judith, by now you know the boys and I are gone. I took our clothes, some of the boys' important things, and my stuff from the den. We're in a small apartment for now until we divide our assets," Rick continued, explaining how he found out about the affair. One night, after she said she'd be working late, he brought her a milkshake, only to discover her with Wes in her office. He had watched briefly, then left with the milkshake, thankful the boys had stayed in the car. That night, he told her he had a headache, a night she likely wouldn't even remember. She remembered that night vividly. It was the first time she and Wes had slept together. Overcome with guilt, she had dreaded facing Rick. But when she got home, Rick said he wasn't feeling well, and she was relieved she didn't have to talk to him. She even said a small prayer of thanks. Rick's letter continued, explaining how he had hired a private investigator, hoping it was just a one-time mistake. But it wasn't. The investigator easily installed a camera in her office after Rick copied her key. Rick admitted he couldn't look at many of the photos, though she seemed to be enjoying herself with Wes. When Judith mentioned the business trip, Rick had already planned to move out while she was gone. He learned Wes was joining her, though she had lied about who would be there. Rick expressed his anger, feeling betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the deliberate deception. He could have forgiven a single mistake, but not a planned betrayal. Rick assured her his lawyer would contact her soon, and he hoped they could settle custody and visitation peacefully. Though he no longer loved her, he wanted the boys to stay in their home. He ended the letter by saying they had nothing more to discuss and that he was done with her. Judith now understood the fear and dread she had been feeling. It was her conscience trying to warn her. But it was too late. Rick was gone, and she had lost everything. Years passed, and Judith and Rick led separate lives, both achieving success in their careers. Judith owned her own company, having built it through hard work. Sitting in her office, she shuffled papers on her desk, trying to make a decision. She reminded herself she didn't need to please anyone but her client, yet she was struggling. She thought about how Rick had always been a great sounding board for her ideas. She picked up her 3 best concepts and murmured, "Let's see what he'd think of these." She started with the weakest one, imagining Rick's feedback, knowing it needed improvement. Then she moved on to the next. Still nothing. Damn, he was tough. That's why I always turned to him for advice. Okay, here's the last one. 2 people are holding hands, walking down the street, unaware of a speeding car heading toward them. The man says, "I got the papers from our Continental insurance agent today. We're covered for anything." In the background, the car swerves and hits a light pole instead. They walk away, oblivious to the danger. "Yeah, that's the best one. The client will like it. I'll have Clark start on it tomorrow. Tonight I'm too tired." I stood up, turned off the light, and saw Will in the doorway. He smiled sadly. "Talking to Dad again?" Yeah, it helps, I said. And it did. Talking to Rick always made things clearer. What are you doing up? You have school tomorrow? Just getting water. I'm not missing the final game tomorrow. Neither am I. We'll be behind the bench cheering you on. He smiled and walked off to bed. Tomorrow was the final basketball game, and if Will's team won, they'd go to the state quarterfinals. It was a long shot, but Will, a starting guard and senior, was hopeful. He was tall, strong, and had the talent for a scholarship. He was his father's son. I followed him to the kitchen, watching him finish his water before waving goodnight. I sat down, not ready for bed. Will was smart, not as brilliant as Robert, but still sharp. He had heard me talking to Rick again, and while he accepted it, Robert hated it. Rick and I divorced after 15 years of marriage, and today marked 8 years since it became official. It was my fault, and I had told the boys when they were old enough. Will took it hard, but eventually forgave me. Robert took longer. After the divorce, Rick never tried to take the boys away from me. He wanted unlimited visitation, and I agreed because having my boys was all I had left. When I went through dark times, Rick took the boys until I was stable. They supported me, likely with Rick's help, and were the reason I kept going. As they grew older, they spent more time at home and less with Rick, who was busy with work. I let them have their freedom, and they became strong, confident young men. Rick and I rarely spoke except about the boys. Financially, we were both stable, so there were no issues with alimony or child support. Over the years, we found a way to cooperate and support each other when needed. It was a peaceful, comfortable arrangement. After several hard years, I don't think Rick ever forgave me, but at least he no longer seemed to hate me. That was a relief. I still talked to him in my mind because I never stopped loving him or relying on his advice. Even though he wasn't there, I could imagine our conversations clearly, and it always helped. It kept me sane, especially during the dark times after our divorce when I almost drowned in depression. Rick was cold for the first 2 years after the divorce. He wouldn't speak to me or let me explain, though I wasn't even sure why I did what I did. His lawyer handled everything, and when I resisted, Rick threatened to change the divorce terms and take the boys. I gave in and signed what he wanted. After the divorce, I spiraled. I threw myself into my job, the only thing I had besides my boys. Though Wes was still around, we had no contact by mutual agreement, but he bragged about our affair, which hurt my reputation at work. People saw me differently, and I became isolated. One night, a colleague asked me out. I initially refused, but then accepted, thinking it might help me move on. I drank too much, and we ended up at his place. The sex was rough and quick, leaving me feeling empty, but I convinced myself I didn't need Rick. Over the next few weeks, I went on more dates, but they all ended the same, unsatisfying and leaving me feeling used. One night, I woke up on the floor of my living room, disheveled and alone, with only vague memories of the evening. I couldn't remember who I had been with, but I knew I had hit rock bottom. That night, I realized how far I'd fallen. Shame and disgust washed over me, and I questioned what I had become. Thankfully, my boys were with their father that weekend, sparing them from seeing me at my lowest. Eventually, I calmed down enough to clean up and make some important decisions. I found an old phone book in Rick's office and scheduled a doctor's appointment. I also resigned from my job, knowing I had to move forward. My sons kept me going, but I was alone most days while they were in school. I came close to doing something reckless more than once, but I didn't, which was a miracle. Before I lost everything, I saw a therapist, Cheryl Hopkins, recommended by my doctor. She put me on medication and helped me slowly regain control of my life. At first, I barely held on, but over time, I fought my way back. Through therapy, I realized that even though I had everything, a successful career, 2 wonderful boys, and a loving husband, it wasn't enough for me. I didn't know why, but I went looking for something more. That's how my affair with Wes began. He was attractive and flirtatious, and I responded. The thrill of the forbidden outweighed the guilt, and we started an affair that lasted 3 months, culminating in the San Diego trip. But it cost me my marriage. I continued working, but my reputation had suffered. Wes had talked about our affair, and I became known more for that than my professional skills. Though I had the option of claiming sexual discrimination, I chose not to stir trouble as long as they left me alone. I also made poor decisions by dating men who took advantage of my vulnerability. These meaningless encounters left me feeling empty, and I eventually realized I had hit rock bottom. That's when I called my doctor and began the long climb out of my depression, with Cheryl's relentless support. It took 2 years, but I finally recovered, though I still check in with her occasionally. I quit my job and left that chapter behind, but I needed to work for my own sanity. Rick had left me the house and enough financial support, but I wanted to build something new. So I started my own business, J. Proctor Packaging Concepts, from home. I used some equity from the house to get a loan and bought the necessary equipment: a high-performance computer, color copier, drafting board, and tools for graphic design and packaging. With that, I began rebuilding my life. At the time, Will had just turned 13, and Robert was 11. They helped a lot, giving me time to work in the evenings while they entertained themselves. It was a good setup. We compromised. I took them to their games, and they gave me quiet time to focus on my business. They understood what I was trying to do, and we worked as a team. It was a great period in my life as I started gaining clients. At first, I got a few referrals from former colleagues. I lost the first 2 accounts but secured the third, and my business began to grow. As it expanded, I hired a small team to handle calls, drafts, and sales. I had a small office built behind the house, which worked perfectly. Over the next 2 years, my business grew steadily, and I became financially successful, paying off my loans. Fast forward a few more years. Will was 17. Robert was almost 16, and I had turned 48. My business was thriving with 12 employees, and I kept it small, focusing on clients who wanted top-quality work. I was financially secure, and the boys had everything they needed. I didn't rely on Rick much anymore, and he agreed to put his support payments into a college fund for the boys. Will was likely to get a basketball scholarship to Ohio State, and Robert, being academically gifted, would easily secure one too. Both boys were popular. Will had a serious girlfriend, and Robert was starting to date as well. My business success brought social connections, and I was well known in the community, often invited to important events. But one thing was missing. I didn't date. Since crawling out of the emotional hole I had fallen into, I hadn't cared about any man. I had plenty of offers from wealthy single men, but I wasn't interested. I only cared about one man, Rick. When Rick left me, it was dramatic. He packed up and moved out while I was on a 3-day trip with Wes. I told Rick it was for business, which was true, but I didn't mention Wes. Rick already knew, though. He had everything documented. I foolishly believed I could keep the affair hidden, thinking consequences were for others. Ironically, during that trip, I realized I was done with cheating. I thought about Rick the whole time I was with Wes. By the end of the trip, I had recommitted to my marriage. But when I returned, Rick had already left, leaving behind photos, divorce papers, and a blunt letter saying we were finished. I deserved it. That triggered my depression, which took 2 years to overcome. Then I spent another 5 years building my business. Despite the divorce, I still considered myself married, holding on to the promise I made to myself on the plane ride back from San Diego, to rededicate myself to Rick. Even though it was too late, my pride wouldn't let me break that promise. During those years, I met several interesting men. I fantasized about a few, even having some erotic dreams, but my only indulgence was a blue toy I kept locked away. I used it occasionally when my boys were out for the night, and though I started thinking of those men, I always ended up thinking of Rick when I climaxed. Strange, right? Life, however, kept moving forward. The night after I had one of those thoughts, Robert and I were at Will's basketball game, and his team pulled off a huge upset, winning and advancing to the state quarterfinals. Will was ecstatic, and Robert was just as thrilled. Proud of my boys, I agreed to let Will's team celebrate at our house. We had the space, a pool, and enough parent chaperones to keep everything under control. The night was a success, and I set about rearranging my schedule to be there for the upcoming regional game. The next day, while working on my schedule in the kitchen, the phone rang. Without checking the caller ID, I answered, "Hello, this is Judith Proctor." Balancing the phone on my shoulder, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a while. "Rick." "Hi, Judith. It's me." His familiar voice sent a chill through me. "Yes, I recognized your voice. Good to hear from you. How have you been?" I replied. "Good. I was wondering about the regional game schedule. I want to see Will play, but don't know the details." "I'm just planning that now," I said. "The game is next Saturday in Columbus. Robert and I are driving down Friday night. We've got tickets, including one for you." "Could we get together for dinner?" Rick asked, surprising me. "The four of us before the game? I'd also like to sit with you and Robert during the game." Dinner together? We hadn't done that in the 8 years since our divorce. We were civil for the boys, but never spent time as a family. "Sure, that would be great," I replied, still processing the unexpected invitation. Will would love to see us together. I told him we were staying at the Madison Hotel, while the other families had rooms at the Marriott Courtyard. Rick was listed under Will's family, so booking a room would be easy. As I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to have dinner with us. Was it something new? Was he engaged? Or was there another reason for this sudden change? Rick mentioned he liked the idea of staying at the hotel and might book a room there. I said goodbye, still in shock from the call, and hoped I hadn't missed anything important. I pushed my emotions aside and finished my scheduling, which now felt even more significant. After all, I was going to have dinner with my ex-husband. The ex part didn't matter much to me. I didn't mention the dinner to Will or Robert until right before we left. Will had already spoken to Rick, knowing he planned to attend the game and spend time with them, but said nothing about us eating together. The night before the trip, I made sure the boys were packed and then called them to the kitchen for apple pie, something they both loved. "Boys, I have news. The three of us are having dinner with your father the night before the game. He called and asked, and I said yes." I expected a reaction, but neither of them said a word. They just kept eating. Their casual attitude surprised me, but then I realized they saw it as normal for such a big event. To them, it wasn't a big deal, but to me, it was huge. I hadn't shared a meal with Rick in nearly 8 years. "Well, it's a big deal to me," I said. "I'm excited." Will looked up and smiled. "We know it's a big deal, Mom. Dad asked us if we were okay with it, and we said yes." I felt embarrassed. "Why didn't you tell me? I made such a fuss." Will reassured me. "You're the coolest mom. The team thinks so too. Dad's looking forward to it, and it'll be great if we can all get along." They teased me for overreacting, but I sensed their excitement too. After cleaning up, I packed the car, but my nerves only grew. I couldn't shake the thought that Rick had found someone new and would use this dinner to tell us. He had dated before, including a serious relationship with Leslie Wells a few years back, and I remembered how sick that conversation made me. Though their relationship ended, I feared Rick might now be ready for something more permanent, and dinner would be the moment he'd break the news. Rick's second serious relationship was about 1.5 years ago with a younger woman, Jean Chambers. She was at least 10 years younger than him. At first I found it amusing, but then I became concerned when he used the word love to describe her. I ended the conversation quickly. He never mentioned her again, but I assumed they were still together. I made it clear to my boys that their father's relationships were off limits in conversations with me, and they respected that. I was convinced this dinner was Rick's way of telling us he was going to propose to Jean. Rick would tell us before making it official. He was always polite and considerate. He had every right to move on, especially after what I did to him, but the thought still stung. The next day, we set off for the drive to Columbus for Will's quarterfinal game. Will was with his team on the bus, and Robert and I drove separately. I wanted to arrive early enough to shower, change, and prepare for dinner. I had a new dress, shoes, and jewelry, and even wore the perfume Rick bought me years ago. I wanted him to remember what he had walked away from. After checking in at the hotel, I let Robert have his own room, explaining he'd have to share with Will later. We decided to check if the team's bus had arrived, but we had beaten it by over an hour. While Robert led the way, I browsed the hotel lobby and nearby shops. Eventually, the bus arrived, and we saw Will with his girlfriend Jill. After greeting her, Will spotted us and came over. He and Robert went to their room to change, while I headed back to the lobby to window shop and people watch. A short while later, I saw Rick walk in. It was both a shock and a thrill to see him again. I didn't make myself known, but watched as he checked in, efficiently as always. He still looked great, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of memories. Even when I fantasized about other men, it was Rick who always came to mind. I went back to my room to get ready and composed myself, making sure I was calm when Rick called. After finishing my hair and makeup, I checked on the boys. They were talking about the game, full of excitement. They looked handsome in clean shirts and pressed jeans. Okay, I pressed their jeans, but still. I returned to my room to finish getting ready. I wanted to put on my dress at the last moment to avoid wrinkles. As I fastened my necklace, the phone rang. It was Rick. "Are you ready?" he asked. 5 minutes, I replied, trying to steady my nerves. After hanging up, I started to panic. The reality of sitting down to dinner with Rick hit me hard. I called to the boys, and when they came into my room, Will whistled. "Wow, Mom, you look hot," he said with a grin. His compliment choked me up. I smiled and kissed him on the forehead, and as he pretended to protest, he whispered, "Go for it, Mom." I was ready. With Will's encouragement, my fears faded. I decided to enjoy the evening with my handsome sons and ex-husband, ignoring the consequences. I linked arms with the boys, and we headed to the elevator to meet Rick. Rick stood in the lobby holding a small box. When he saw us, he smiled and walked over. For a moment, we looked like a regular family: husband, wife, and 2 sons. Rick complimented me, saying I looked beautiful, and I thanked him, blushing. He greeted Robert with a teasing remark and shook Will's hand, sharing a meaningful glance with him. Then he handed Will the box. "This was given to me by my father when I went to college," Rick said. "Now it's time to pass it on to you." Will hesitated, then opened the box to reveal a gold pocket watch, intricately engraved. He admired it, clearly moved by the gesture. Robert was excited too, showing no jealousy. I felt a surge of pride in my boys, and a tear welled up in my eye, which I quickly wiped away. "Shall we sit down?" I said, trying to keep things light. Rick, understanding, gently took my arm, and we were seated in the restaurant. Rick sat next to me while Will and Robert sat across, both grinning. Dinner was fun. The boys devoured burgers and fries, while I had a salad and sandwich. Rick enjoyed a steak, and we all laughed and talked easily. For dessert, the boys had pie. Rick ordered sorbet, and I skipped. My dress was tight enough as it was. After dinner, the boys left to meet their curfew, leaving me alone with Rick for the first time in years. Surprisingly, I wasn't scared. I had already lost him long ago. Rick ordered coffee, and I nodded in agreement, wanting the evening to continue. We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. I realized how much I had missed this connection. I wondered why we couldn't have parted as friends, but I knew the answer. The pain I had caused him was too deep to easily forgive. The waiter brought our coffee, pouring it for us before stepping away. Now we were truly alone. I wasn't sure what to say and wondered if I should be the one to start. After all, wasn't this the conversation I had wanted for so long but never had? Should I take the chance now and say the things I'd kept bottled up? Just as I worked up the nerve to speak, Rick turned to me. "Judith, can I ask you something? Just a few things that have been on my mind for a while, if that's okay." I was relieved that he started the conversation. "Of course, Rick. Anything. Just ask." He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true you talk to me as if I'm there? As if I'm actually with you?" That's what he wanted to ask? God, I'd prayed for this opportunity. "Yes, it's true," I admitted. "I've always done that, ever since I started the business. I valued your advice so much that, when you weren't around, I pretended you were. I knew you so well that I could imagine what you'd say, so I filled in for you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." Rick looked at me, surprised. "Why didn't you just call me for advice? Wouldn't that have made more sense?" "Rick, you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. We both know why. So why would I call you for advice?" I asked, holding his gaze. He nodded in understanding and looked away. For a moment, I thought I'd been too blunt, but then he turned back to me. "You never date," Rick said suddenly. "Why is that? I know things didn't work out after the divorce, but you're still beautiful and successful. I know plenty of men would love to go out with you. Why haven't you dated?" It was the question I'd expected, and I was ready for it. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. What did I have to lose? I made a mistake 8 years ago, and I paid the price for it. I had no choice but to pay it, and I have. But after working with Cheryl Hopkins, my therapist, I realized there was only one man for me, and that man was you. I saw him about to object, so I quickly added, "Before you say anything, you need to understand. I made that promise on the flight home from San Diego. Wes and I had already ended our affair. I was ready to recommit to our marriage and to you. I realize now how naive that was, to think I could just walk back into your life after what I'd done. But nothing I did then was reasonable or fair. I know that now. I screwed up, Rick. It was all my fault. I take full responsibility." I watched Rick process what I was saying. Taking another deep breath, I continued. "After the divorce, I promised myself I'd be the perfect wife for you, even though I knew I couldn't be with you anymore. I've kept that promise, Rick. Even though we're divorced, I've stayed faithful. Dating someone else would feel like cheating on you. And I can't do that. I won't do that." Rick looked confused, unsure of what to say. I smiled gently and, after a few moments of silence, added, "And I'll tell you something the boys don't know. Sometimes I think of, well, let's just say inappropriate things I'd like to do with other men. But guess who I always end up with in my dreams?" Rick still looked puzzled, so I waited a few seconds before revealing the truth. "You, Rick. Even in my dreams, I can't cheat on you. I may imagine other men at first, but you're always the one I end up with." Watching his expression, I couldn't help but laugh. It was too funny. He had no idea how to respond, and for the first time in 8 years, I had the upper hand. God, how good it felt to say something serious, funny, and absurd to my ex-husband without any fighting or drama. It was just fun, and I realized I was enjoying myself. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I just wanted to tell you the truth, whether you believe it or not. I know my credibility isn't exactly your top priority." Rick shook his head, still unsure how to take it or what to say. "I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but that's fine. One more question, if you don't mind. What are your plans for the future? If you don't date and won't date anyone else, do you plan to stay single for the rest of your life? I can't believe that's what you want." Yes. There wasn't anything else to say. That was my choice, and I made it 6 years ago, after I emerged from that dark place. I explained it to Cheryl, and she accepted it as a reasonable decision. I had my reasons, and she knew them, so she never tried to change my mind. Rick looked at me, his eyes locked on mine. I met his gaze, my confidence in my own life and decisions giving me the strength to stand firm. If I couldn't have Rick because of what I did to him, then I'd paid the price, and I was free to make my own choices. I chose to be alone. Rick was still processing everything I had told him. I had been honest, given him the truth, and he knew it. There wasn't much for him to say, so he stayed quiet. I suggested we move to the lounge for a nightcap, and he gave me a look I didn't recognize. After 8 years, though, people change. Rick slid out of the booth, reached back to offer me his hand, and led me to the lounge. As I followed, I admired him from behind. He really was a striking man. He stopped to pay the bill while I waited in the lobby, noticing a few glances from men nearby. I was used to that kind of attention, and ignored most of it, except for a few interesting looks. But I never gave the wrong impression. No flirtatious gestures, no lingering eyes, nothing to suggest I was available. Rick came over, took my arm gently, and guided me into the lounge. We sat at a small table in the back, and instead of sitting across from me, he chose to sit beside me. I was pleasantly surprised and smiled widely. He smiled back. "Judith, I have to tell you something. Over the past 3 years, I've hired a private investigator to check up on you, just to prove to myself that Will and Robert weren't exaggerating about how you lived. I never wanted to invade your privacy, but I couldn't help but wonder about your personal life. My smile faded. After everything I'd done, I deserved to be punished. But what right did he have to keep tabs on me after all this time? It wasn't fair, and I felt a surge of anger. For the first time in years, I knew I had to say something to Rick, even if it risked pushing him away. After 8 years and a divorce where you cut me out of your life, you decided to investigate me? I never did that to you. I told the boys not to discuss you or bring your affairs or flings into my home. I respected your privacy. Why couldn't you do the same for me? I'm sorry, he said. At first I told myself it was to protect the boys, but I knew that wasn't true. You were a great mother, and they've told me countless times how much they adored you and how you gave them everything they needed to thrive. Then I told myself I just wanted to see how you lived without a husband. That was closer to the truth. It shocked me to see how you lived. Never dating, only going out with women or clients. I couldn't understand why, and it drove me crazy. That's part of why I wanted to join you tonight and for the game tomorrow. I needed to see for myself that you're happy and content with your life. And I'm convinced you are. You're happier and more at peace than I ever saw you before. It's a real improvement. I listened carefully to everything Rick said, and strangely enough, I believed him. The Rick I knew wouldn't invade my privacy without a reason. This was his way, and I understood him. He was still looking out for me, and for our sons, of course. Well, I guess you had your reasons, but I would have appreciated it more if you had just asked me. We talked from time to time. You could have asked. Would you have answered me? Honestly? Yes, Rick, I would have. This is who I am now, the person I became 5 years ago. I'm not the same woman who cheated on you, the one you shattered. I know who I am now, and I know what I did. I've paid the price. What's the saying? Do the crime, do the time. Well, I did the crime, and the time afterward was hell. For 3 years, I lived in darkness. First the divorce, then the fallout, the depression, the downfall. But I picked myself up and moved on. So yes, I would have told you everything. I would have welcomed the chance to explain why I did what I did. I prayed for the chance to say 2 things to you, Rick. Just 2 simple things. You were never at fault for any of it, and I'm so sorry for what I did. Rick listened intently, and when I finished, his eyes widened. I could see a glassiness in them, as if he was fighting back tears. Rick was a proud, strong man, and I knew how hard it was for him to let me see him like this. So, like any loving wife would do, I stood and excused myself to the ladies' room. I moved quickly to protect myself from breaking down in front of him. Once inside, I let myself go. I cried to release the tension, and when I finished, I was done. I had said what needed to be said. I was proud of myself, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Those simple words had been incredibly powerful. I rinsed my face with water, reapplied my lipstick, and put a few drops in my eyes to hide the redness. I looked at my reflection. Yes, I was ready to go back. When I returned to the table, Rick was sitting with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as I approached and greeted me with a huge smile, a look of pride. Proud to be with me. Be still, my heart. Silly girl. He stood like the gentleman he always was, and waited until I sat down. Then he surprised me by saying, "Thank you for giving me time to compose myself. You always did know me better than I knew myself." "I did," I replied, "but that's because I loved you so much. It came naturally. It still does, Rick. I still love you, you know." I nearly tensed, preparing for his reaction. I was ready for anything: anger, pain, disgust, surprise, even embarrassment. Any of those would make sense from someone I'd hurt as deeply as I hurt Rick. I was prepared for the worst. What he said next completely surprised me. "I believe you, Judith. I really do believe you love me now, and that you loved me then. I never doubted that. My actions weren't because I thought you loved Wes more than me. I divorced you because your betrayal hurt so badly that I couldn't find a way forward with you. And I tried. I really tried. When I found out what you were doing, I asked myself if I could forgive and forget. I was almost ready to accept it as a mistake we could move past. Then you lied about the San Diego trip and who you were going with. That's when I knew my love wasn't enough. I had no choice. As I listened, my heart broke. Not for me, but for him. His voice softened as he continued. You might not believe me, but walking away was the hardest decision I ever made. Because like you, I never stopped loving you. Even knowing what you did, I couldn't stop loving you. I just couldn't forgive you. And I knew I'd never forget. Rick, please, let's not go there. I understand, and I don't blame you for not forgiving me. I know what I did, and I carry that shame. You've been fair with me, always cooperative when it came to our sons. You've never thrown my mistakes in my face. All I can say is thank you for giving me this time to say what I needed to. It's a gift I'll always cherish. Thank you. Rick looked at me with that unfamiliar expression again. I didn't fully understand it, but it wasn't anger or resentment, so I was grateful. I felt good, like maybe we could become friends again. I wanted to steer the conversation to safer ground. Tell me about Jean Chambers. Last I heard she was heading towards Sirius. Is she about to become the next Mrs. Proctor? My stomach flipped at the mention of her, but I thought if I brought it up, he'd feel comfortable mentioning his future plans. His expression shifted to surprise. Maybe he hadn't planned to talk about her. Maybe it was still too soon. He shook his head and said, I haven't seen Jean in almost 2 years. Surprised you even remembered her. Really? You mentioned once that you thought you might actually love her. I assumed marriage was in the cards. I was smitten at the time. She was young, ambitious, and I thought I could keep up. Boy, was I wrong. We broke up not long after. I said I'm not seeing anyone now. Haven't been with anyone since her. But why? I couldn't help asking. You're still as attractive as ever, and you have everything a woman would want. You're successful, good-looking, great in bed, and well off. What's stopping you? I just haven't found anyone who satisfies me completely. The women I've dated were either too pushy, not assertive enough, bad in bed, or just looking for someone to take care of them. None of them had what I needed. He paused, then looked at me seriously. There was one who had it all, but it didn't work out. I took the bait, eager to hear more. This was my Rick. Even if what he said hurt me, it was wonderful to just sit here and talk with him. Why didn't it work out? Was she foolish enough to let you slip away? Who was this crazy woman? It was you. And yes, she was foolish. She pushed me away. It's too bad because she was perfect for me. My breath came in shallow gasps. This was it. My chance for something I had given up hope on ever having again. If I didn't take the risk now, I would regret it forever. I might crash and burn, but I'd go down fighting. Heart in hand, I went for it. Maybe she learned her lesson, Rick. Maybe she's smarter now and knows what she'd have with a man like you. Maybe she's ready for you now, ready for a life together with all that comes with it. I'm sure she wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Do you think that's possible? Could she be different this time? Why wouldn't she make the same mistakes again? He asked quietly. I don't think I could take that kind of pain again. It hurt too much the first time. I think she'd rather die than make those mistakes again. She knows how much pain she caused those she loved. I think she'd die before doing that again. In fact, I know she would. I know it with all my heart. Rick looked at me and I held my breath. Could he forgive me? Had time softened his heart enough to dull the pain I caused him, allowing him to love me again? I looked into his eyes, holding his gaze, hoping the person I had become would be clear if he looked closely enough. He said nothing but reached for my hand. I gave it to him, still holding my breath. If he didn't speak soon, I felt like I would burst. This night had taken a turn I never expected. He had gone all the way back, offering a chance I thought was lost forever, and I wasn't sure I could hold on much longer without screaming. I believe you because I want to believe you, Judith. I have to believe you if I want to be happy. I haven't been happy in the last 8 years. I've tried to forget you and move on, but that's been a failure. None of those women were you. That's who I was searching for. I finally realized that there's only ever been one woman for me. My heart soared at his words. But then he paused and his tone shifted. But Judith, the only thing I can say today is that I forgive you. I forgive you for destroying my family and my marriage. I've tried to move on for years, but I couldn't. Something was always holding me back. Now I realize it was my anger. I'm letting it go. I don't have any emotions left that tie me to you. You said I devastated you for 8 years. No, I didn't. It was the consequences of your actions. I just reacted to what you did. Now I feel nothing for you, no anger, no hate, and finally, no love. Then he stood up and walked away. Will's team lost in the quarterfinals, but we all cheered him on. He played brilliantly, and it was enough to earn him the scholarship he had worked so hard for. His father and I were so proud of him that night. He played his heart out, but accepted the loss with grace. He went on to play in college, earned a degree in business management, and joined his father's company after graduation. He worked his way up until Rick retired and passed the business to him. Along the way, Will married Jill, his high school sweetheart, and they now have 3 wonderful children. Robert earned an academic scholarship and attended Harvard. He wanted to be a lawyer, graduated with honors, and joined a law firm in New York City. He built a reputation as a fierce attorney and eventually started his own practice. He now has a team of 4 lawyers and recently proposed to a woman he met through one of his cases. They seem deeply in love, and we are hopeful for their future. Rick and I met several times over the years. He was always polite, too polite, and I could tell it was just out of courtesy. I still loved him, but he had nothing left for me. I couldn't blame him. I had made him the man he became. I kept my company, and we stayed successful in the industry. Over time, I let my partners take on more responsibility and worked less and less. When Rick handed his company over to Will, I made the tough decision to sell mine to a group of my employees. We reached an agreement, and I finally retired. I turned 60, and everyone came to celebrate. But as I mingled, smiling and chatting with everyone, I kept looking for Rick. I laughed and made small talk, but inside, I felt empty. I had a house, a car, and my sons, but no one to share my life with. Rick passed away a year later. He never remarried, all because of me. He died peacefully in his sleep. I saw him in the casket, white-haired, clean-shaven, and still handsome. Although he left me emotionally long ago, this time he was gone for good. I still visit his grave. I sit there, but I have no words for him. All I'm left with are regrets, wishing I had made different choices. But all I can do now is regret.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Ben Harris. I'm a 42-year-old manager at a construction firm in Los Angeles. I met my wife, Kathy, 12 years ago when she was 21, working as a file clerk just outside my office. What caught my attention first were the tight jeans she wore that hugged her hips perfectly. She was young, attractive, and left quite an impression. At the time, I had been divorced from my first wife for about 4 years and had no children. I always wanted kids, though, and with Kathy working nearby and handling the project files, it felt like things just fell into place. We started having lunch together, and after a few weeks, I invited her to spend the weekend with me. It was a great weekend, good company, good chemistry, and we started dating seriously after that. A couple of months passed before Kathy told me she was pregnant. I was excited but also direct. I asked her if she wanted an abortion or if she wanted to get married. She didn't want an abortion, so the next weekend, we had a small, private wedding. I was thrilled. At 30, I felt ready to start a family, to be a dad, and I wanted to be young enough to enjoy every part of my kids' lives. But something shifted in Kathy after that. She became quiet, withdrawn, and pregnancy was not something she enjoyed. At the time, I thought maybe it was just the strain of carrying a child, but I later realized it was more than that. Kathy had married me not because she wanted to build a family, but to escape her mother's house. She had no real interest in having children and had even aborted 2 pregnancies from a previous relationship. That was something I didn't learn until much later. About 3 months before the birth of our first son, Kathy quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and prepare for motherhood. Our second and third sons arrived shortly after, and within 3.5 years, we had 3 healthy, energetic boys. With 3 young kids to look after, Kathy was constantly busy and often exhausted by the time I got home from work. I truly appreciated her dedication as a mom, but as her energy for parenting increased, her desire for intimacy seemed to fade. The gradual decline in our physical relationship left me feeling a bit on edge. I noticed that Kathy's attitude began to change when she turned 30. The kids were now all in grade school, and I had assumed Kathy would be able to relax a bit more and pay more attention to me. Unfortunately, our sex life continued to remain at a low ebb. I never really knew what Kathy was doing during the day with the kids in school. I looked back at what my mom used to do: cleaning the house, doing the laundry, shopping for food and the kids' clothes, taking the kids to soccer practice. I assumed Kathy's day would be pretty much the same as what I had seen my mom do. One day, Kathy approached me after dinner and told me she would like to find a part-time job. She said she was getting bored staying at home by herself during the day. I was a little concerned because I didn't see how she could make lunches, get the kids off to school, clean house, do the laundry, take the kids to soccer practice, go shopping, and still find the time for a job. I was worried that her health may suffer from plain exhaustion. Kathy spent a few weeks looking, and then by word of mouth found a part-time job as a bookkeeper for a small local gym. She told me that she would be given a free membership and would only work from 8 a.m. until noon. This would allow her to get the kids off to school and come home after work to do the necessary chores before the kids got home. She told me that if there was ever an emergency at school, the school could reach her at work, and she would only be 10 minutes away. Kathy's appeared to have thought this out carefully, and I could find no flaw in her logic. So I told her, go for it. Kathy started work and seemed to get an emotional lift from having to interface with adults at work. Things seemed to settle into a well-established routine, and Kathy's demeanor substantially improved. A few months after she started work, Kathy approached me with a request to take advantage of the gym's free membership. She wanted to go to the gym early in the morning from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. to exercise, then come back home to get the kids off to school, and then head off to work at 8 a.m. Because of my commute, I had to leave the house at 6:30 a.m., so I really didn't see any conflict with the family's overall schedule. A few months went by and I began to notice Kathy getting her old figure back. She had dropped 20 pounds and was now carrying 120 pounds on her 5 feet minus 4 inches frame. When I complimented her on her efforts, she surprised me by telling me she felt her boobs were too small. She told me she wanted breast enhancements to make her boobs perky again. I realized after having 3 kids, she deserved the implants, especially if it would improve our stale sex life. Kathy got her implants, and it took her a couple of weeks to fully recover. Apparently, the surgeon inserted the implants through her armpits to make them look and feel more realistic. He did a very good job, and she was ecstatic with the results. Kathy again returned to her part-time job and early morning workouts. Things got back into the groove of everyday family life. But that was soon to change dramatically. It was early Saturday morning and I was cleaning out Kathy's car. As I took out the floor mat on the driver's side, I noticed a small cellophane bag underneath the car seat. I pulled out the small bag and noticed it was partially filled with white powder. I had no idea what was in the bag, but the possibility that the bag contained drugs crossed my mind. I began to get an uneasy feeling. Where would Kathy get drugs? Could the drugs belong to a friend? What in the hell was going on? What was Kathy doing during the day? I decided not to tell Kathy what I had found. I needed time to think things out and talk to an old friend who lived life walking on the fence. If the substance in the bag was a drug, my bud Timothy would know. That afternoon, I asked Kathy if she could take the kids to their soccer games because I needed to get an oil change for my car. I told her I would be back in a couple hours. I left the house and headed across town to Timothy's apartment. Just as I was about to knock on Timothy's door, the door opened and Timothy bent down to grab his newspaper. It had been a couple of years and Timothy was surprised to see me. I told him the kids, family life, and weekend soccer games was keeping me busy, and chasing skirts with my old single buds was probably not practical. When he laughed, I told him I needed a favor. He told me, that's what friends are for. I entered his apartment and I showed him what I had found under Kathy's car seat. He opened the bag, wet his index finger, and tapped the white substance. He brought out a small amount on his fingertip, looked at it, and touched it to his tongue. Timothy casually said, "Meth?" I stood there stunned. What was Kathy doing with meth? And who had given it to her? I must have looked bewildered, for Timothy told me to sit down. Timothy saw the look in my face and asked me about Kathy. I told him she was working part-time as a bookkeeper at a local gym. He laughed and said, gyms were a haven for drugs. Steroids, meth, and cocaine were the usual suspects, and the most trainers wind up banging their housewife clients. It is very common. But he mentioned this may just be the tip of the iceberg of Kathy's shenanigans. I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach. I think Timothy saw the blood drain from my face. Timothy looked at me and said, "You need to hire a PI. They will be discreet and are professionals. If you follow her and find her having sex with some guy, what are you going to do?" punch the guy out and get arrested for battery. And you may even lose the fight and give him a get-out-of-jail-free card to beat the hell out of you claiming self-defense. Punch her out and get arrested for felony spousal abuse? You're the one who would go to jail, and you're the one who would suffer as Big Bubas's bitch. All you would do is leave the door wide open for Kathy to continue her affair, and she would probably have the guy move into your home while you were in jail. When you got out, you would have nothing. California is a no-fault state, so her adultery would be ignored. But it gets worse. If you could not support her and your kids because you were incarcerated, the courts would take your 401k and retirement funds to use for spousal and child support. And remember, there is nothing to stop you wife from using those funds to support her lover. You would have effectively thrown away your life up to this point. When you are finally released from prison, you would carry the stigma of being an ex-con to every potential employer you contact. Unless you can start your own business, which is highly unlikely, you will be forced to take a job, if you can even find one, at a fraction of the pay of your current position. Timothy went on, "We have been friends for a long time, so I want you to hire a PI, and I want you to bring me all the information he finds. If she is taking drugs, you need to get her into a rehab facility for the sake of your children and the stability of their home. However, if she has committed adultery and you have done nothing to encourage that particular behavior, then she has lost respect for you and has disregarded the welfare of her children. If that is the case, you will never gain back her respect, and you need to take the kind of action that will allow you to walk away from this situation with your pride and your balls intact. No woman is ever sorry she cheated on her husband. She is only sorry that she got caught. A woman who is unfaithful fully intended her actions. She knew exactly what she is doing. It is a selfish act that totally disregards the feelings of her husband and family. And remember, the next time for her gets easier and easier. However, if she was drugged, then she was not cheating, but she was involuntarily assaulted." Timothy continued, "Women are different than men. From their late 20s to their late 30s, women's hormones are running wild. They are at the same runaway hormone level as an 18-year-old guy. Any woman who has been married for a few years and hits that cycle is looking for a new sex partner. Whether they successfully find it is another question. With the divorce rate in the Los Angeles basin at 65%, with 85% instigated by the wife, for first marriages and 80% for second marriages, and with an overall female infidelity rate of 50%, equates to a lot of wives screwing on their first and second husbands with no remorse. It appears that few women learn their lesson, but most continue their infidelity in subsequent marriages. Remember, not only does it get easier and easier, but the grass is always greener on the other side of the hill until you have to mow the lawn. Well, Ben, that is why I stayed single. I just saw too much in my line of work as a PI. With the divorce laws the way they are, men, in general, are fighting an uphill battle. And remember, Ben, it is a war to get the upper hand. Men don't marry partners. They marry adversaries and spend the rest of their lives suffering in silence. I left Timothy's apartment that afternoon shaken to the core. I took the business card of the PI Timothy handed me. I would call the PI Monday. I wasn't going to be emotional and mentally abused by anyone's runaway hormones. 2 weeks later, I stared in disbelief at the PI's report. Apparently, Kathy was meeting a trainer from the gym during her early morning workout. They had a routine worked out where they met at 4:30 a.m., spent a half hour screwing in the back of her car, and then went in for a workout when the gym opened at 5 a.m. It had never occurred to me to check what time the gym opened. I felt like an idiot. I had trusted her, and she had deceived me and the kids. I was not sad, nor was I heartbroken. I was experiencing ice-cold rage. The trainer turned out to be a small-time drug dealer who dealt in steroids and meth. I called Timothy and told him I would be stopping by with the PI's report. The drive through crosstown traffic was miserable. 45 minutes later, I was ringing Timothy's door. Timothy opened the door, invited me in, and motioned me to sit down. Timothy slowly digested the PI's report and gently handed it back to me. He told me to listen very carefully. "First," Timothy said, "you must not do anything that will make her suspicious. It is imperative that she does not suspect you know anything. This coming Monday, I want you to. I work early Monday around 4:15 a.m. Kathy was just getting out of the shower and went over to put on her gym shorts and top. I wondered if she was even wearing panties. Probably not. I lay in our bed pretending to be asleep. Once she went downstairs, I quietly got out of bed, slipped into my clothes and waited until I heard the garage door open. I heard the garage door close and I quickly went downstairs, put on my gloves, grabbed my camera with a telephoto lens, and went into the garage. I opened the truck to my car and pulled out Kathy's original plastic bag and 2 additional plastic bags of meth that Timothy had given me on my last visit. I took the bags and my camera, laid them on the passenger seat of my car, opened the garage, and headed down the road towards Kathy's gym. As I approached the gym, I killed my lights and parked about 50 yards away from the gym's parking lot. I picked up my camera, the 3 bags of plastic, and exited the car. As I approached the parking lot under the cover of the bushes, I noticed Kathy's car parked a slot away from an older Ford Bronco. I couldn't see anyone in the Bronco, but I did notice some movement in the backseat of Kathy's car. I crept up to the Bronco and slowly opened the driver's door and tossed 2 of the plastic bags into the passenger's seat. I then kept low and snuck around the front of the Bronco and tossed the last plastic bag on the ground by the backseat of Kathy's car. I looked up and I could see Kathy's head by the far window. She getting pounded doggy style by a male I had never met. I assumed it was her trainer. I crept back out of the parking lot and went around the corner. I pulled out the untraceable cell phone I had purchased with 30 minutes of time and dialed 911. I gave the operator a fake name, the address of the gym, and told her that I was witnessing a rape and child abduction in progress. I told her the male suspect may be armed. I ran across the street and hid in the bushes poised with my camera and telephoto lens. In less than 3.5 minutes, 2 squad cars pulled up without their sirens and with their headlights off. Simultaneously, they drove into the parking lot and turned on their headlights on the 2 cars. The cops opened their squad car doors and stood behind them with their guns drawn. I could hear the cops through the bullhorn telling the occupants of the car to exit the vehicle now with their hands on top of their head. An unknown male emerged first wearing only his boxer shorts. Kathy, still topless, came out next wearing her gym shorts. Both occupants were told to turn around and place their hands against the car. 2 cops, under the cover of the other 2 cops, approached Kathy and her friend, grabbed their hands one at a time, and handcuffed their hands behind their back. I saw one cop bend down and pick up a plastic bag. He then showed it to the other cop and motioned for the other 2 backup cops to come over. 2 of the cops went over to the Bronco and opened both front doors. 1 cop came back holding 2 additional plastic bags. The cops conversed for a couple of minutes, ran a check on the license plates of the 2 cars, and checked the driver licenses they had found in Kathy's car and the Bronco. Although I didn't have much light, I was snapping pictures as fast as I could. I then saw the cops take Kathy and put her in the back seat of one squad car, and her friend went into the back seat of the other squad car. Then the squad cars drove away. I headed back to my car and drove home. When I got home, the kids were still asleep. 6 o'clock came around, so I woke the kids up to get them ready for school. At 7:30 a.m., I drove the kids to school. I thought to myself that I was doing a pretty good job as Mr. Mom. I drove home and called my boss to let him know I would not be coming in that day. About 11 a.m., I got a collect call from a sobbing Kathy telling me she needed to be bailed out of jail. She and her trainer had been arrested at the gym for possession of an illegal substance. I said I would find out what her bail was and see what I could do. She was crying as she hung up. I called my attorney and told him I wanted to file for divorce that week and to request supervised visits for Kathy. I also wanted him to obtain a restraining order against Kathy to stay away from the kids and not come within 100 yards of my home. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. I walked over to my liquor cabinet, took out my bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label, and poured about half my glass. I went into the living room and, as I looked at her smiling photo, I quietly said, "You filthy 304, you can rot in jail. You will never come back to my home." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I always felt connected to the rhythms of rural life. The changing seasons, the smell of freshly tilled soil, and the hum of the tractor were constants for me. But as I got older, I became curious about the world beyond our farm. Stories of distant cities and foreign lands sparked a desire for more than our small town could offer. Our life was simple, rooted in hard work. We weren't struggling, but luxury was a foreign concept. My parents were content, but I dreamed of exploring the world. I knew I needed to make a bold move to break free from the farm. Growing up on a farm taught me that if I wanted more than occasional trips to the local store, I'd have to take drastic action. We weren't destitute, but far from comfortable. By age 7, I was already hauling and stacking hay bales. After high school, despite my parents' wishes, my best friend Hal and I enlisted in the Marines. We spent 4 years stationed in South Korea and Japan. Though we were advised to stick to American-friendly spots, Hal and I explored as much as we could, knowing this might be our only chance to see the world. I spent half my money on fun and sent the rest home. Our service was mostly uneventful, filled with sentry duty and occasional misadventures. By the time we were discharged, everyone called me Army instead of Calvin Bostic. a nickname that stuck when I returned home, though people misunderstood its origin. Back in Belford, job options were limited to farming and construction. I chose construction, working hard all day and still having energy to hang out with friends in the evenings. I met Stacy at Higgins' restaurant, and it was love at first sight. After many attempts, she finally agreed to go out with me, and we got married 9 months later. At 24, Stacy and I were happy, but knew we needed to save money before starting a family. My dad advised me to seek better job opportunities, and he was right. We could barely cover our expenses. After 2 years of marriage, we had little savings and lived paycheck to paycheck. The nearby cities of Somerville and Kensington offered more job opportunities, and we hoped to improve our situation one day. One afternoon, Stacy excitedly shared news about a new gym opening in Kensington with better pay. She was eager to apply and hoped the job would help us save for a family. After a successful interview, Stacy started working at Stokes Fitness Palace. Initially, she dressed conservatively, but over time, her outfits became more revealing, which made me uncomfortable. However, when I visited the gym, I saw that her co-workers dressed similarly, which eased my concerns. Her job seemed to boost her confidence, and her libido increased, leading to wild nights together. She credited her workouts and healthier lifestyle for the change, and I was happy with the new energy in our relationship. One Friday, Stacy mentioned a promotion at the gym and asked me to attend a special event for spouses. Though I was skeptical, I agreed to go. On the night of the event, I felt uneasy, so I brought Hal along. He lent me a spy pen that could record audio just in case. When we arrived at the gym, Hal wasn't allowed in at first, but I insisted, and we both entered after handing over our phones. Inside, Stacy looked nervous, standing next to her supervisor, Gerald Goliath Jenkins. She was dressed in a skimpy bikini, which shocked me. When I asked what was going on, Goliath smugly explained that he had set up an arm wrestling contest, where the winner would get both a cash prize and a night with Stacy. Though she initially resisted, the money tempted her, and she eventually agreed. Goliath revealed his plan to erase my memory with ketamine after I lost, so I wouldn't remember any of it. Stacy would get the money, and we'd continue our lives as if nothing happened. I realized Goliath had made several mistakes, including underestimating the loyalty of his accomplices and assuming I wouldn't notice being pilled. I knew I had to stay calm and think through my next move. One of the goons claimed to know the right dose to knock me out, but I was done playing along. Forget it. I'm not competing. If Stacy's considering this, she's yours. Do whatever you want with her. I'm leaving, I said coldly. Goliath responded, "You can't leave, Army. A deal's a deal. I promised Stacy you'd compete and forget everything. I don't care anymore. I just want a divorce." Stacy started sobbing at my words. Ignoring her, I added, "If you want me to compete, you'll have to liquidate me afterward." Goliath dismissed my threat, saying, "Let's get started." They marched me into the gym, where the men cheered and catcalled at Stacy's nearly undressed body. I looked for Hal, but he was gone. "Where's Hal?" I asked. "He left on his own," one of the guys lied. I knew Hal wouldn't abandon me willingly, so I figured he was nearby. I needed help, fast. Goliath, hiding his muscles under a light jacket, addressed the crowd, keeping their hopes high. "All right, everyone, this is what we've been waiting for. All 40 of us paid our entry fees and signed the waivers. Stokes Fitness Palace isn't responsible for any injuries. It's a double elimination tournament. Lose twice. And you're out," he continued. "Stacy insisted her husband, Army, gets a shot too. He'll face the top contender. If he loses, the winner takes everything. Agreed?" The men nodded. "Great," Goliath said. "The winner gets $20,000, a trophy, and a night with Stacy. You've all seen her video. The winner's in for the night of his life." The crowd cheered as Stacy flirted with them. Goliath added, "We have official referees from the World Arm Wrestling Federation. Their decisions are final." The matches began, with 2 contests at a time. The gym filled with cheers and groans as the men competed fiercely. I sat in the middle, disgusted, watching my wife allow other men to touch her. Anger boiled inside me. After an hour and a half, the field narrowed to 10 finalists. One of the goons snarled, "You just had to open your mouth. After this, I'm going to knock you up and say you fell down the steps." In the semifinals, Goliath easily won, setting up the final match between him and me. He refused to break, confident I was no challenge. I removed my windbreaker, tied it around my waist, and approached the table. The room went quiet. No one believed I had a chance. They already assumed Stacy would be Goliath's prize. I asked, "Where's the $40,000 prize money? I want to see it." Goliath taunted, "Why do you care? You're not going to win." "I still want to see it. I replied. The goons fetched the locked box, and the referees confirmed the money was there. I asked referee Justin Albright to hold on to it and ensure I could leave alive. Goliath smirked. You'll leave, don't worry. His look told me otherwise. I suspected his goons were waiting outside for me. Satisfied, I said, I'm only here for the money. I don't care about her anymore. I'm tempted to leave her here, win or lose. Stacy shot me a furious look. Enough talk. Let's get this over with, Goliath said. Stacy kissed him passionately, fueling my anger. When she tried to kiss me, I stopped her. Don't touch me, Stacy. You're nothing but a cheating witch. If I had my way, I'd divorce you right now. Get behind me. I can't stand the sight of you. Stacy started crying as the crowd gasped. The referees seemed uneasy, and I hoped they realized I wasn't here by choice. Goliath challenged me. Put your arm up, and let's see who's the real man. The room erupted in support for Goliath. I reluctantly placed my arm on the table, locking hands with Goliath. Referee Kevin Saunders reviewed the rules, and the match began. I pushed with all my strength, but our hands didn't move. Goliath grinned and slowly forced my hand down, winning the first round as the crowd cheered. Taking a deep breath, I reminded everyone, best 2 out of 3, and prepared for the next round. Goliath laughed, confident in his victory. You don't stand a chance. The room cheered for him, fueling my anger even more. Kevin repeated the instructions, and we started again. Goliath smiled, sure of his victory. I used every ounce of strength and leverage, but after about 10 seconds, Goliath's strength wavered. My arm locked in place, and I pushed back with everything I had. The crowd went silent as I slowly forced his hand down. When the referee called the match in my favor, the room fell into stunned silence. Goliath jumped back in disbelief. No way! That was a fluke! I'm going to crush you now, he shouted, tearing off his jacket and ripping his shirt to show off his muscles. He slammed his elbow on the table, ready for the final match. I ignored his theatrics, focusing on my breathing to stay calm. Kevin signaled the start, and Goliath threw all his strength into the first push, nearly pinning me. My hand shook, but I held on, waiting for him to tire. Then Stacy's voice called out, Come on, Goliath! Finish him so I can have you! Her words enraged me, giving me a new surge of energy. I pushed back, slowly turning the match in my favor. With one final effort, I slammed Goliath's hand onto the padded mat, and the referee declared my victory. I had defeated him 2 out of 3. The room was stunned. Goliath, in disbelief, asked, How did you do that? I'll explain if you meet 2 conditions, I replied. First, give me the $40,000. Second, let me leave here undamaged. Goliath agreed, and Justin handed me the money, which I zipped into my windbreaker. I addressed the crowd. I've won fair and square. Whether you like it or not, I'm not to be touched. Goliath confirmed this, though I suspected his goons were waiting for me outside. I explained, I've worked on farms and in construction all my life, building strength and endurance. In the Marines, I arm wrestled regularly and never lost. My muscles aren't built for short bursts of strength like Goliath's. They're built for endurance. That's how I knock 'em. Now, I'll take my leave. I retrieved my phone and started toward the door, the crowd still in shock. Stacy called out, offering to drive us home and talk, but I responded, I'll wait outside. Go put some clothes on. She saw it as a chance to talk, but I intended it as a way to buy time to escape. As I reached the front door, I saw Hal's car. He flashed his lights, confirming he was ready. Just then, 3 of Goliath's goons appeared from behind an SUV and started running toward me. But Marines are trained to run, and I outran them, diving into Hal's car. Hal didn't wait. He peeled out, leaving the scene with tires screeching. I managed to escape with my memories intact. I didn't abandon you in there, Army, Hal quickly assured me. Some big guys forced me out and tossed my phone on the ground. They said it was a closed event and I wasn't invited, so I waited. I was about to call the police, but since no one else came out, I figured you were okay. But seeing those guys chasing you didn't look friendly. What happened and where do you want to go? He asked. Take me to my place, I said. On the way, I told him everything. Hal was shocked and couldn't believe Stacy's betrayal, especially with the pilling plan. He shook his head in disbelief. What do you want to do? Hal asked as we pulled up to my place. Park behind the building. Stacy will probably show up soon. If she's alone, I'll talk to her while I pack. Can I crash at your place for a few days? Of course. I only have a couch, but it's yours, Hal replied. The couch is fine. If she brings any of those thugs, I'll slip out the back and head to your place. Wait, I have an idea. I took the cash and hid it in an empty fast food bag, which we stashed under Hal's spare tire. I might need backup. Got your weapon? Always, Hal said, showing me his pistol. He tucked it into his waistband and followed me inside. I was nearly done packing when we heard the front door unlock. Hal hid in the closet as Stacy rushed in. "Thank God you're here. I was so worried you'd be gone. We need to talk," she said, sounding remorseful. "Are you alone, or are the guys you hooked up with earlier nearby?" I asked. "It's just me," she winced. "I'm sorry for what happened tonight. I got caught up in everything. I was supposed to excite the guys, and I went too far." I smiled sarcastically. "Why bother? They'd already paid. It's not like you'd get more out of them." Stacy tried to justify her actions, claiming she was playing both sides, hoping we'd get the money no matter what. She praised my win and said she was happy to be with me instead of someone else. "That's not how I remember it, Stacy. I heard you cheering for Goliath, telling him to finish me off so you could have him," I replied. She looked down but insisted she wanted to build a family with me. "This was just a one-time thing for the money." Goliath was sure I wouldn't remember anything. "But even if I forgot, you'd still be a cheater, Stacy. You were okay with having me pilled and held against my will. You betrayed me. That's unforgivable. We're done." She started sobbing. "No, you don't mean that. We belong together." Suddenly there was a knock at the door. "Why don't you see who it is?" Stacy suggested sweetly. "I don't care who it is," I said, suspecting it was the thugs. Stacy grabbed my phone and left the room. As soon as she opened the door, she let in Goliath and the 5 goons. "I have his phone, so he's not recording anything," she said. Little did she know I had already activated the recording device. She continued, "Just hold him down, get the pills into him, and make it look like a mugging." "What is this? Get out of my house!" I shouted. "I'm sorry, honey, but I can't let you remember tonight. It'll be easier if you just drink the stuff and go to sleep. If not, they'll force it down your throat and rough you up," she admitted. "You didn't plan on this," I said, as I pulled out my Glock 17. "Now sit down. I don't want to shoot anyone, but if I have to, I'll strike 3 of you before the rest decide what to do." They froze, clearly not expecting me to be armed. Goliath sneered. "You wouldn't shoot. We'd still get you." "Want to bet?" I replied calmly. "I'm a Marine, trained to shoot. If anyone makes a move, I'll put a bullet in 3 of you. Now sit down." One of the goons hesitated, but finally said, "Why should we? We still have a chance." "You have no chance," I replied. "If you want to talk, sit. Otherwise, I'll call the police. It's your choice." They sat down as I instructed, sliding back on the sofa and chairs to make it harder for them to get up. I positioned myself against the opposite wall, sitting in a kitchen chair with my pistol resting on my thigh. My finger hovered just outside the trigger guard, ready to act. "Look, sweetheart," Stacy said, "just give them the $20,000 and take the ketamine. Tomorrow, we'll wake up $20,000 richer, like nothing happened." I asked how she'd explain the money to me. "Simple," she replied. "You won $40,000 and gave me $20,000 to hold. Then you got mugged on the way home. They might have to rough you up a bit to make it look real, but you'd wake up as my loving husband, and we'd have a bright future." I started laughing, which made the men uneasy. Stacy looked puzzled and began to stand. "Grab his weapon," Goliath urged. "He won't hurt you. He loves you." "He's half right," I said. "I used to love you, but if you stand up, I'll shoot 3 of these guys." She sat back down, shocked. "You're so stupid, Stacy. You fell for Goliath's lie that I'd wake up with no memory and believe whatever story you told me. But you were never going to see a dime of that money. They planned to pill me and have their way with you. They'd record everything and use it to blackmail you into doing whatever they wanted. This was never a one-time deal." Stacy tried to deny it, saying the guys were happy with what they got earlier, but I pointed out the video she made, which could easily spread and ruin her reputation. "Now, whose idea was it to invite me tonight?" I asked. Stacy admitted it was Goliath's idea. He wanted to humiliate me, not just by screwing her, but by making me watch. He wanted control, to keep me from interfering and calling the police. And once they had their blackmail material, they'd own her. "You were never going to get that money, Stacy. They'd make sure of it, they'd use you whenever they wanted, and you'd be stuck." Stacy finally began to realize she'd been duped. She admitted to agreeing to sleep with Goliath, but not the others. I laughed at her naivety. "You really think they'd go to all this trouble and not take turns? They'd get what they wanted, and you'd end up with nothing but a blackmail video. And even if you got the money, they'd make sure you paid for it. At the gym, they'd stage my injuries to look like an accident. But here at home, they'd make it look like a real mugging. They'd knock me senseless, maybe even break some bones. You wouldn't have the money to cover the medical bills because you were never going to get it. And if you did, Goliath would just use that as leverage to control you further. And let's be real, Stacy. You'd never go off birth control because you'd be too scared of getting pregnant with one of their kids, not mine. She sat there, finally understanding the mess she was in. I had figured it all out and made it clear I was done with her and her lies. Stacy stared at me in shock. Let me point out another flaw in your plan, I said. You wanted to say I got mugged after giving you $20,000, but there are 42 witnesses, including the referees, who saw me leave with all the cash. No mugger would have left any of it behind. Your story wouldn't hold up. They'd take every cent. How'd an uneducated jarhead outsmart us? Goliath grumbled. Stacy looked horrified, realizing how badly she'd been played. Just because I don't have a degree doesn't mean I'm stupid, I replied. In the Marines, I was trained to think through situations. Earlier tonight, I knew those 5 guys were over liquidation. You claiming to control them because they couldn't take you is ridiculous. You can't control what they do on their own. I bet you're all buddies, but this wasn't just about money. The split would be small, so why risk everything? No, the reward had to be worth it. I'm guessing you told your buddies about Stacy, and they helped you with this plan. Suddenly, Goliath grabbed Stacy and pulled her in front of him. Drop the weapon or I'll snap her neck, he threatened. I'm not going to shoot you, Goliath, but I will shoot 3 of these guys if you hurt her. Eliminating her just gives me more reason to act, I said, raising my Glock. Now, let her go. One of the goons spoke up. Jerry, let her go. This guy isn't bluffing. He'll shoot us. Goliath hesitated, then released Stacy. The goon continued. Look, you're not going to shoot anyone. You don't want prison, and you're not going to call the cops either. Why wouldn't I asked. He explained. We've got 42 witnesses who saw your wife acting like a witch. They think you were in on it, pimping her out. You can deny it, but it'll look like you just got jealous. We might have threatened to rough you up, but liquidation? No way. That's how it'll play out. You can't prove otherwise. Goliath let go of Stacy, who looked at him with a mix of fear and anger. The goon continued. We'd be caught with ketamine and a video camera, sure, but we're vets. We have a plausible reason for everything. Stacy won't report us because she's got no proof. Meanwhile, everyone saw her behavior tonight. She made that video, and you might not want that coming out in a small town. Goliath growled, I need that money. I just bought a new truck. The smarter goon cut in. Forget it. You lost the contest. Splitting the remaining money 5 ways isn't worth the risk. Stacy was the real prize, and we planned to keep her for ourselves. We weren't going to turn her into a promiscuous immediately. We had more events planned with her as the prize. Eventually, we might let her have a kid, but only after she was thoroughly ours. We'd even give her some money back to keep her happy. But now it's over. We're leaving. The man next to the leader spoke up. We'll leave, and you two can sort things out. But honestly, I doubt counseling will help. You'll never truly forget or forgive. Still, I have a suggestion. I can give you some ketamine, a good dose that, with a few drinks, should erase your memory. We planned on giving you about 6 shots of booze. If you love Stacy, you could take it after we're gone. She won't be working at the gym anymore, so she's safe from us. Hopefully, she's learned her lesson about being gullible and the risks of cheating. I was amused by how quickly they were trying to salvage their plan. You think I'd actually do that? I asked. The man continued. It'd be like giving her a second chance. She could explain the money truthfully. You won it in an arm wrestling contest. Most competitors don't live locally, so it's unlikely you'd ever run into one again. If you did, they might mention your hot wife, but probably not her behavior. I pretended to consider his point, but questioned how she'd explain my memory loss. That's tricky, he admitted. She'd have to make it look like you fell and strike your head after drinking. You might decide to get checked out at a hospital, so you'd need a solid story. But you'd still be married, and love can make you trust her explanation. The men chuckled at that, clearly trying to convince me. I suspected they were already thinking of ways to come back for the money. I let him continue. You'd have to take the ketamine tonight, though, to ensure it erases enough memory. You might remember going to the gym, but not what happened there. That gives Stacy the chance to fill in the blanks. I then raised the real issue. What to do about Stacy? I could just divorce her and move on. That seems like the smartest choice, I mused aloud. Stacy began begging, promising she'd never do anything like this again. But you still cheated, I replied. And taking ketamine after you guys leave raises another problem. What if you come back and blackmail Stacy for the money? You could create doubt and tear us apart." The men all shook their heads, including Stacy. I demanded each of them verbally promise they wouldn't bother us again, which they did, piling on assurances as if I was about to let them go. "The big problem is, Stacy would have to hurt me enough to cover the amnesia," I continued. "She'd need to make it look like a real fall. Could you do that, Stacy?" "Oh yes, I'd make it convincing," she said eagerly. "A few kicks to the head and ribs, maybe even stage a mugging. We could say we went out to celebrate and you got jumped. I could claim I ran for help and when I came back they were gone. I'd bring you home and kick you here to make it look real. I'd use your heavy boots and leave some bruises, maybe kick you in the balls a few times. Just enough to hurt, but not do serious damage." I couldn't believe how quickly she got on board with hurting me. The 6 men stared at her in disbelief. "And tomorrow I'd take care of you, bringing you ice packs for your head and balls," she added, almost gushing. "We'd save our marriage, have money for a baby, and I promise I won't cheat again. That includes making out or letting anyone feel me up." I noticed she only said that because I called it cheating. She still didn't fully agree. I asked her calmly, "You really wanted to have sex with Goliath, didn't you? You'd be thinking of that when you kicked me." "Okay, I won't lie," she admitted. "Yes, I was excited about screwing him. I felt his excitement and wanted it. It would have been wild. But now I'm mad at both of you. You for figuring it out and him for planning it. I'd like to kick you both in the nuts. Maybe that could be a condition for letting them go. I get to kick Goliath a couple of times too." Goliath bristled. "Screw that, I'm being honest here. You won't remember this anyway, and you won't remember the other stuff either." Stacy's flushed face showed she'd remember everything and enjoy the memory, even if she missed out on actually being with Goliath. She seemed eager to hurt me, just as she had been ready to break my heart earlier, as long as I wouldn't remember any of it. "Since we're being honest, I have a few more questions before deciding whether to let you go or let Stacy erase my memory," I said. Both Stacy and Goliath nodded eagerly. "You both claimed you never actually slept together and were candid because you thought you'd erase my memory. Stacy even asked that I get a chance to win the prize, though she didn't think I'd succeed. But tell me, did you plan to make me watch before pilling me? You've hinted at it both ways." I already suspected the truth and confirmed it when they responded. "Yeah, we thought it'd be thrilling to make you watch," Goliath admitted. Stacy liked the idea of having that kind of power over you. The word power stood out, especially considering how much Stacy seemed to relish the thought of hurting me after I passed out, or maybe even while I was still conscious, just to hear me scream. "It wasn't just me," Stacy protested, still not realizing what she was saying. "Goliath said it'd be hot if you cried while watching him be a better man." I then asked who suggested it first. Goliath quickly replied, "I did, but Stacy added ideas to make it wilder." I followed up with another question. "You said she gave you all heads this afternoon as payment for your help. Is that true?" One of the men confirmed it. "Yeah, she agreed to it to show she was on board and to pay us since we couldn't compete for her." I nodded, hiding my emotions. By then, I just wanted answers. All 5 men admitted she'd done it, each providing details. Stacy then said, "Let's let them go and take care of your memory. We can reset our marriage, and I promise I won't be tempted again." I barely kept a straight face. "Yeah, after you enjoy stomping my nuts," I said sarcastically. "Oh no, I won't enjoy it. I'll just do enough to make it look real," she contradicted herself. I asked the men if they planned to double back for the money, and Stacy after I was out, and they all denied it, trying to convince me. I pulled out a second cell phone, raising my Glock to remind them I was serious. "These guys aren't going anywhere far. They'll give us just enough time for me to take the ketamine and maybe stage the mugging. Then they'd come back for the money and you, Stacy." Stacy looked shocked. "You'd be dumb enough to tell them I'd taken the pill and they'd return to finish the job," I said. She asked what their plan was. "They already have enough blackmail material on you. Do you really think they didn't record everything? They'd come back, take the money, and force you into their plan again?" I could have pretended to take the ketamine, waited for them to return, and caught them red-handed. But that would have been risky. Goliath ranted about how a dumb Marine outsmarted them. I asked where the video was, and the veterinarian admitted it was in his case by the door. Stacy retrieved the camera and tossed me the SD card, but I confirmed the footage was also saved on the camera's hard drive. I told them I didn't care about the video and let Stacy decide what to do with it. "If you let them blackmail you, that's on you," I said. I had bigger concerns, like the recording I had been making since the beginning. Just then, the emergency operator's voice came through. What is the nature of your emergency? I gave my name and address to the emergency operator and reported, I have 6 men my wife invited to our home to attack and rob me. I'm holding them at under pressure and need officers dispatched. No ambulance is needed yet, but it might be if one of them tries anything. All 6 men glared at me. What the hell? We were ready to leave. You even talked about fixing things with your wife. We gave you the camera. You could have deleted all the evidence. We'd have no blackmail material left, the veterinarian protested. Stacy looked shocked. Well, my marriage is ruined because of you guys, so I'm returning the favor. Now you can explain to your wives why you got arrested and see if they believe you. I doubt they're as gullible as mine. 3 of the men shifted in their seats. I raised the Glock, making sure they saw my finger on the trigger. I wouldn't try it. This trigger is sensitive and takes less than 2 pounds of pressure to fire. And Stacy, I told you I'd never trust you again. You seemed too eager to fake a mugging by stomping my nuts. I called out for Hal, who stepped out from around the corner. This is his phone, I said, holding up the phone I used to keep the emergency call active. Everything's been recorded and the pin recorder is back up. One of the men yelled, "That's hearsay." I shrugged. It'll still be part of the statement, and whether it's allowed in court or not, your wives might not like what they hear. I kept the weapon moving between them, knowing they were close to making a move. Hal, go outside and inform the police. I'll put the weapon down when they enter. When the officers arrive, they'll take us all in. You weren't involved, so secure everything for me, okay? I said, handing him the SD card from the camera. Got it, Hal replied. I'll come down to the station after locking up. We heard sirens as police cars approached. The emergency operator confirmed. Officers are on location. I instructed, my friend is at the door, and it's unlocked. I'm sitting in the room with the pistol held by the barrel. The first officer through the door was Hal's older brother, Bob, a police lieutenant. What's going on here? Army, put the weapon down and step away. I complied, noting his body cam was running. Well, it seems my wife cheated on me, gave these guys heads earlier, and planned to sleep with this one, I said, pointing at Goliath. They threatened to pill me with ketamine and booze. When that plan failed, they came here for a second chance. My wife let them in and gave them my phone so I couldn't record anything. It's in his shirt pocket, I added, nodding at Goliath. That phone should show their intentions. Goliath quickly countered. Ridiculous. We drove Stacy here after her husband left her in Kensington following his arm wrestling win. She invited us to celebrate. He's delusional. He told contestants he feared for his life. I suggested taking us all to the station to give statements and make a public record. Bob cut me off, saying he knew what to do. Soon, everyone but Hal was in handcuffs and loaded into police cars. Hal told Bob he'd secure the house and then come to the station. I knew he'd upload copies of the recordings as planned. At the station, I explained what happened and what I suspected their plan was. I advised Bob to check the case left at my house for ketamine and the camera with the video of Stacy. Bob offered me coffee and then began taking the other statements. Later, Bob returned. Army, these guys are all telling the same story, that you're crazy. They claim you won the arm wrestling competition and then held them at under pressure after Stacy invited them over. One of them is a lawyer and wants to represent the others, but since he's also a suspect, he can't. They're all writing statements. Do you have any proof? I can't open the files on that camera without a warrant, but I did impound it. I told Bob that Hal had an audio recording of their confessions and was making copies. This changed everything immediately. As soon as Stacy heard about the recording, she broke down and changed her story, claiming she was seduced and blackmailed into cheating by the guys. An officer accompanied Hal and me back to my house with my permission, so no warrant was needed. They secured a small case one of the men had left at the door. Inside, along with the camera Stacy had removed earlier, were 2 bottles of liquor, ketamine, large tubes of lubricant, and some flexible hoses. The video downloaded from the camera clearly showed my soon-to-be ex-wife happily engaging with all 5 men in Goliath, talking about how much she loved the thrill and how she couldn't wait to be with Goliath after he won the contest. Bob might have pushed the limits, but he let me watch the video at the station. By then, I had my own copy to watch later. With enough evidence, Stacy, Goliath, and the 5 men were kept in jail until their arraignment on Monday. I kept the SD card hidden. Bob told Hal and me to stick around, but I decided to leave town. Early Sunday morning, I bought 2 cheap round-trip tickets to Las Vegas for Hal and me. We spent the day collecting discarded sports betting slips, amassing nearly $40,000 worth, planning to claim I'd lost most of the money. Hal and I had a wild time in Vegas, taking photos at strip clubs and posing with liquor bottles to create a story about spending our winnings on a good time. We even made donations to a children's cancer hospital, wearing the sweatshirts they gave us for our contributions. On Monday, I ignored a barrage of calls, suspecting some were from Stacy's parents. Bob eventually texted, demanding I call him back. When I did, he wasn't pleased, but told us to get back home. When we returned, Bob gave us an official reprimand as he took us to the district attorney's office. We claimed we didn't realize we had to stay in town and thought close meant anywhere in the continental U.S. Bob and the DA weren't happy with our explanation. The DA asked me to go over the events again. My story matched the audio recording perfectly, and I was more determined than ever to divorce Stacy. I visited a lawyer, Mr. Price, who advised me that the divorce would cost around $2,000 but was the least of my worries. He told me not to stress about hiding the money since I didn't have much left, and that the criminal charges against Stacy and the men were more important. On Tuesday, I found a new apartment close to work. Though my parents would have taken me in, I preferred to stay independent and away from Stacy. By then, rumors had spread in our small town. The story was that Stacy had an affair with her boss, who came to my house to confront me, and I held him at under pressure until the police arrived. After Stacy refused to move back in with her parents, I moved out. Following my lawyer's advice, I kept the true story quiet, holding onto the audio recordings as leverage. On Wednesday, I started receiving more calls from unknown numbers. The fourth was from Gloria Jenkins, Goliath's wife, who texted, asking me to call her. Curious, I did. She picked up immediately and told me her husband claimed everything was a misunderstanding. She wanted to meet in person, so I drove to Kensington, bringing Hal's recording pin just in case. At the cafe, Gloria introduced herself. She was a stunning woman, blonde and in her late 20s. Despite her calm exterior, I could sense her anxiety. I wasn't sure if she was a sufferer or in on the scheme with her husband, so I stayed cautious. She explained that all she knew was her husband and his friends had been arrested after an incident at my home, and she suspected she wasn't getting the full story. She asked me to explain what had happened. Realizing she and the other wives deserved to know the truth, I suggested inviting them over. I pointed out the three women sitting across the cafe who had been watching us since I arrived. Gloria seemed impressed by my observation and invited the women over. After introductions, one of them nervously asked, "Is it as bad as we imagined?" I replied, "Maybe not for you, but for me. It's the end of my marriage." Goliath had been trying to seduce my wife for a while. He succeeded in everything but actual sex, and he and his friends planned to blackmail her into being available to them in the future. I watched their expression shift from disbelief to anger and back to shock, with muttered curses all around. "No wonder the cops held them so long," Gloria said. "They got out this morning and have been with their lawyer since. I assume you have proof, even though the guys claim you don't." I pulled out a flash drive. "I have hours of audio recordings, pretty damning stuff. There's some irrelevant chatter in the middle, but I can summarize it and then you can listen." One of the women shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe how dumb your wife is. A head isn't cheating? Seriously? And to make a video of herself knowing it would be sent to strangers?" Another added. "She thought it was okay to cheat as long as you didn't remember because of the pills?" Someone muttered. I nodded, noticing how the women weren't shocked by their husband's behavior. "Why would I be?" one woman said. "My husband's an egotistical idiot. My mom warned me he'd cheat eventually. When we heard about an angry husband with a weapon, we figured it was something like this. But this is worse than we imagined." Gloria suggested, "Let's go to my office. We can listen to the recording there." She explained she worked in investments and had a nearby office. They listened to the recording, fast-forwarding through the arm wrestling competition. By the end, they were almost as angry as I was. One woman joked, "Teach me how to bite it off if he tries that crap again." The others laughed, and they all made quick phone calls, none lasting more than a minute. Gloria explained that the 6 men had been tight-knit friends since high school, bonding over bodybuilding. They chased girls but were disciplined, charming, and stuck together more than with their wives. "We girls get along because of them, but our marriages aren't great. We're like satellites around their bromance." Later, when the others had left, Gloria asked me, "Army, you're clearly smart. Why are you working such a low-income job?" I shrugged and explained, "After I left the military, I wanted to stay close to my parents." "Do they need constant help?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, they actually told me I didn't need to stay so close, but I got complacent. It was home. Hal's in a similar situation. His brother's a senior police officer, but he works a low-stress job too. I continued. While overseas, I read a lot, mystery stories mostly. It kept my mind sharp. Gloria laughed, and I found myself liking her laugh more than I should have. I quickly excused myself, feeling guilty. You can call me anytime, I told her, though I wasn't sure I should admit how much I looked forward to it. After several calls, texts, and voicemails, Stacy finally tracked me down, pleading to talk. All right, Stacy, what makes you think there's a misunderstanding? And why do you think there's any chance of saving our marriage? She looked startled. You made it clear on Saturday night. You didn't think what you did was wrong. Flirting, making out, letting another man touch you wasn't cheating? Even what you did with those men wasn't cheating as long as I didn't know? Stacy babbled. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just got caught up in the excitement with Goliath. So, the next time a hot guy comes along, you might get caught up again? I asked sarcastically. And you thought it was okay to humiliate me, wipe my memory, and then everything would be fine? I surprised myself by staying calm. I wasn't angry, just indignant. Stacy ran through her excuses and finally admitted, I was wrong, but I want you, Army. I want to have your babies. It was just fun, and I didn't think you'd ever know. But you would know, I pointed out. You'd remember and think you got away with it. She suggested counseling, but I wasn't convinced. Do you want to listen to a recording of what you said Saturday night? If you still think it was acceptable, then we can talk. I had no intention of fixing our marriage, but I wanted her to confront the reality of her actions. The following Saturday, Gloria invited me to a dinner party with the other wives and girlfriends. I wanted to see Gloria, but wasn't entirely trusting, so I carried a small pistol. I'm glad you came, Army, Gloria said warmly. I was hoping you'd trust me, but I understand being cautious. You're smart to be prepared. The women discussed their husbands' weak excuses. None of them seemed that upset about the divorces, one said. They're more worried about money. We're going after half of everything and won't pay a cent for their legal defense. My husband downplayed the charges, another added. But when I quoted the recordings, he panicked. He didn't realize you recorded the whole night. I nodded. Exposing them was my main goal. Gloria giggled. Jerry's reaction was priceless. How did a jarhead think to record everything? One woman added, It saved me from marrying Andy. I need to look beyond the surface next time. They raised their glasses, cheering in agreement. Gloria seemed to be studying me closely. One of the women asked if I'd talked to Stacy. I admitted I had, curious about her excuses. They guessed I'd recorded it and laughed, saying they'd done the same with their husbands. Damn, your wife is delusional, one commented after hearing the recording. She doesn't think what she did was that wrong. She's just mad you found out. Gloria added thoughtfully. She admits her faults, but still wants a future with you. If that's love, I'd hate to see her version of hate, another woman quipped. Gloria replied, She loves him, but doesn't understand that love alone can't fix a marriage. There's so much more needed. She looked at me intently, leaving her statement hanging in the air. I waited until midweek to call Gloria, curious to see how she was doing. I was surprised when she seemed genuinely happy to hear from me, and we decided to meet up that weekend. I'm really glad you called, Army, she said when we met. I wanted to call you, but hesitated. That surprised me. I hope you trust me this time, Gloria added with a grin, then joked. Maybe I should frisk you, and not just your waistband. I stared at her, caught off guard. We're not kids, she continued. I think we both feel a connection. Of course, we met under the worst circumstances. You're probably wondering what kind of shallow person I am to have fallen for a guy like Jerry. I started to protest, but she kept going. I was in love with the idea of love. Jerry was smart, good-looking, and had the kind of physique that made people admire him. It fed my ego to be the one who won him. My mom warned me he'd break my heart, but I didn't listen. By the time I realized she was right, I was already married. But I'm not a quitter, she added sheepishly. Though this is one time I should have quit. I can see why your wife fell for his charm. He could sell anything. He was great at coaching, always encouraging people. I'd never seen him try to seduce another woman, and I'm not sure he ever cheated on me, though he denies it. My mom wasn't surprised by what happened. She said it was just a matter of time before Jerry stepped out on me. At least we didn't have kids. I'm not sure what Jerry saw in me either, Gloria admitted, blushing. To me, it was obvious. She was smart, compassionate, and incredibly attractive. I'm pushy, maybe too driven. I was raised to always do my best and expect the same from others. My parents didn't have high incomes, but they loved their jobs and raised two well-rounded daughters. They encouraged us to try everything: dance, sports, music, so we could find what we liked. Dad didn't say much when I told him about Jerry. Mom spoke for both of them when we discussed it. She even had a few things to say about you. Me? I was surprised. I've never met her. True, but you're part of the story, Gloria said. Curious, I asked, what did she say? Most of it's between us, but she analyzed you and your wife like I did. And, I prompted, she agrees with me. Stacy loves you, but doesn't respect you. I nodded. Yeah, I've wondered if she even loved me at all. Oh, she loves you. She wants your kids. If she just wanted to cheat, she wouldn't have cared if you found out. She went to great lengths to keep your marriage intact. But part of her thinks you're not good enough for her. She wants the upper hand. That's why she talked about humiliating you after sleeping with Jerry. That's a whole new level of disrespect, and it pisses me off. I laughed. It didn't exactly make me happy either. Gloria's eyes filled with tears. You don't get it. It infuriates me. I want to rip her hair out for what she planned to do to you. She might not respect you, but I do. Taking a deep breath, she continued. From the first moment we met, I respected you. You had the guts to meet Jerry's wife, and you treated me with kindness and respect. I liked that. I liked you. Let me finish, Gloria said, holding up her hand. You remind me of my dad. They say girls marry men like their fathers. I didn't with Jerry, but I see some of Dad in you. Mom even warned me not to fall for you too quickly, but I'm struggling here. I have to know. Do you like me? I admitted. I felt guilty about my feelings for you. Part of me wanted to be with you just to get back at Jerry, but I realized I don't care about him. I care about you. And that scared me. I'm married, even if it's to someone who doesn't deserve me. But yes, I like you, Gloria, she smiled. Good. Then we can take our time and see how we fit together. We both laughed, and then she asked, Can we at least kiss? I nodded, and she quickly sat in my lap, kissing me deeply. When we pulled apart, she grinned. I'm staking my claim on you. And when the gold runs out, you'll move on? I teased. She giggled. No, I'll reinvest everything I find. I want a relationship built on love, not just lust. Respect is key. We'll find common ground because I'm a pushy woman who knows what she wants, just like my mom. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what Gloria had said. I knew I was rebounding from Stacy, but this felt different. Gloria was right. Stacy might have loved me, but she didn't respect me. That stung. Gloria, on the other hand, openly respected me, even comparing me to her father, whom I hadn't met yet. She was clear about her growing feelings, and while I was deeply attracted to her, it scared me and made me feel guilty. Meanwhile, Mr. Price filed my divorce papers, separating my finances from Stacy's. Without a job, she relied on our meager savings and eventually had to call her parents for help. This meant confessing our separation and its cause, though she conveniently left out the worst parts. Her father called, upset, urging me to consider counseling since, in his version of events, Stacy had merely flirted and gone too far with her boss. I sent him a flash drive with the audio recording of that night. 3 days later, he apologized, admitting he understood but still needed to help his daughters stay out of jail. By the end of the second week, everyone involved knew I had the full audio recordings. The 2 veterinarians were sanctioned, unable to handle anesthetics, which made their work nearly impossible. At the gym, every female member was informed about Jerry's actions, and Stokes Fitness fired him to avoid a mass walkout. I couldn't sue the company, but my attorney had considered it. The criminal trial took 6 months, which I learned was relatively quick. The local media followed the case closely, given the prominence of the men involved. Lawyers tried to suppress the audio recordings, the prosecution's key evidence, and the men even tried to press charges against me for holding them at under pressure. That was quickly dismissed. Stacy, feeling betrayed, turned on them and testified for the prosecution, revealing how they planned their attack on me. Her confession of agreeing to pill me earned her a 2-year sentence, with 18 months suspended. While I initially would have been satisfied just to ruin their relationships, I couldn't deny a sense of justice being served. During this time, I grew closer to Gloria. She was a tough taskmaster, pushing me to enroll in college. Hal joined me, and we both did well. By the time the trial came, we had completed a semester with good grades. Gloria also set Hal up with Marie, one of the exes of the goons. Both women were remarkable, and Hal joked about their shared fates. Gloria and I waited until our divorces were final before taking our relationship further, and it was worth the wait. On our honeymoon, Gloria revealed she had stopped her birth control months earlier, wanting to start a family with me. She also had a temporary tattoo on her back that read, "Exclusive property of Calvin Bostic," which made me laugh. We both felt lucky to have found each other. One day, while out for a snack, we ran into Stacy, who was back at her old job after serving her time. She tried to make small talk, but I informed her that Gloria was now my wife and that we were expecting a child. Another server took over for Stacy, who seemed upset. Over the next few months, Gloria and I settled into a new rhythm. My divorce from Stacy, though difficult, felt necessary for my happiness. Gloria and I focused on our future together, excited about the arrival of our baby. The criminal trial concluded and justice was served, giving me closure. When our son was born, our lives were filled with joy. Gloria and I continued to grow closer, grateful for the second chance at happiness. Looking back, I realized that the difficult journey had led me to where I was meant to be, by Gloria's side, with our son in my arms, finally feeling at home.